Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started. How are you guys doing? Welcome back, friends and fiends. We're going to do a little stream today. We're going to talk about some D&D stuff, the usual. We're going to jump in. I had sort of a question that's been knocking around in the back of my mind for a little bit. I figured, today we might as well jump in and see if we can maybe address some of it or get some confirmation on it, really. 'Cause I've been thinking about both as I've been prepping, plus some other content that other content creators have put out there, talking about what are the rules of D&D as we know them. And maybe that sounds like a really dumb question, but more it's the aspect of, okay, so we just celebrated a 50th anniversary of the game not that long ago, but is the game complete? Think about over 50 years and what, close to a dozen, maybe actually more than a dozen. Let's say a dozen iterations of the game in different forms and facets. Is it finished? Because when I think about it, I'm like, we have a lot of combat rules, but once we take a step away from combat, what all are we left with actually? When we think about it. I went, yeah. Yeah, because I do feel like if you're a dungeon master like me and you've been doing this for a while, there's not a lot of support once you get out of combat as to how the game kind of runs. Sure, when we look at stuff, and I know some of this stuff, and I know we're gonna look at probably the past roughly 20 years. So we're gonna look from basically 4th edition, Essentials, 5th edition, 5.5. We can keep going back, but I feel like the last 20 years is a pretty good approximation of what modern D&D is, contemporary D&D, and look at its bones and how we should talk about it. So that's what we're gonna do. This is a curiosity of mine, so come along for the ride. We're gonna take a look at it together. I think the best place to start is, you know what? I think we should start with 5th edition, just plain old 5e, not 5.5, 5th edition, and I figure we can look at. Let's do this. I am pulling up some. So let's pull up. I think I have the basic rule. Let's do the basic rules. You know what? Let's do. We're going to come at this primarily from the dungeon master aspect of it. Let's look at because that's where it's going to lay out how to create those sorts of situations. We have lots of rules about like how to create combat encounters. But I'm thinking that we're not going to find a lot of stuff when we get into the exploration and the social aspect. So there is the DM basics rules. So let's do that. And then we'll do the DMG with errata. And then for 5.5, we're going to have to look at the website because there is not a downloadable basic rules file for 5.5, almost as if it's been designed to try to push you towards D&D Beyond, which is true. That's why they did that. Sure we can say it's access or whatever, but that's no better access than simply having a downloadable PDF document. So we can do that as well. So I'm going to pull that up. Well, so we'll take a look at it. That's the basic. That's the one we were just looking at. Leave. .5. There we go. D&D Beyond basic rules. That. Okay. I believe I have pulled everything up now. So again, we're going to try to look at this from what's kind of going on the combat aspect, what's going on in the exploration aspect, and what's going on with the social aspect. Our 3 different pillars of play. I'd also probably add downtime into that, which is a very anemic pillar that we don't really talk about. That's kind of its own thing, but also kind of not. So I think we'll add that as well. If we're going to do this, I guess I should go ahead and make a document. So let's do that. I'm going to pull up the document just for us to kind of take a look at that. All right. So we're going to do D&D rules. We're going to do combat. We're going to do exploration. Which again, exploration is such a broad category because it's basically everything that's not talking to something or killing it. So it's most of the game, even though I don't think we'll find that the rules are really going to reinforce that. Social / RP. Role playing. And then down at the bottom is some little kind of anemic thing. We're going to go ahead and add time. I think those are when I think about like the primary pillars of D&D, those are kind of what I think about. And I want to make downtime a more impactful thing, and I think a lot of people want to as well. That's why we're adding it in here, even though technically that kind of falls under social and exploration. It gets a bit weird, depending on what you're trying to do in it. Go ahead and make those headings. Heading as well. And we're off to the races. All right, perfect. So I think let's pull up some combat stuff. How about that? All right. So I've got my stuff up. Let's space. All right, we've got the document up. Document we don't necessarily need right now, so we'll throw that to the side. And I'm going to thing that I actually want to look at is our handy dandy right here. All right, so this is the DMG for 5th edition. So as we all know, it's organized very terribly, where it starts off like build your own world. Like that's not super good advice for brand new dungeon masters. Very overwhelming. Master of rules running the game. Table rules, the roll of the dice, exploration. Our first thing up. So exploration, very interesting to lead with exploration. Using a map. Okay, so under exploration, under my thing, and we'll show it here in a second. 5E and 5E rules. We had using map and travel pace. Things that affect travel pace. Okay. Kind of important. I think we're going to find a lot of this kind of stuff. Go through here. So we're going to talk a lot about travel pace for some reason. So maybe my experience of 5th edition is different than your experience of 5th edition, but for me, most people don't really use travel pace when we're moving around. This is a very old style thing. We're going to see this in every edition that we talk about because it goes all the way back. Anytime that you're moving across the overland, original, maybe not OD&D, but early D&D, very, very focused on how fast you move around places, which I'm not sure is particularly important. I don't find it to be particularly important as a dungeon master, but maybe some people do. I can understand, I find tracking time a lot more interesting than speed and how far someone goes. So I guess that is also a function of time. It's just a lot of math. It's a lot of math to do that I don't think is particularly interesting. This is going to be... Actually, let's do this right here. Let's see. So it talks about using a map. Dungeon, tracking, mapping stuff. Wilderness map. Lets you tell the pace, all that good stuff. And then it's immediately going to drop you down into paces where it starts talking about squares and hexes. So they think for their mapping, you should be doing 1 mile hexes and 6 mile hexes. 6 mile hexes is often the standard that most people go to. It's not my preferred standard, but I understand why it's the standard. And it has to do mainly with the math. Because if you do the math, this is a little inside baseball for a dungeon master. So if you have a regular hexagon, and from side to side they are 6 miles, that reason they chose 6 miles is because from point to point that makes the hexagon 7 miles. So you get 2 nice full round numbers to play with, which is very easy, much easier to multiply than if you choose a different thing and then you're a different scale, and then suddenly you've got a whole bunch of decimal points all over the place, a bunch of decimals that you want that are a pain in the butt to like do long division by hand on. Remembering that the game came out before necessarily everybody had a calculator, a smart calculator and computer in their pocket to do this stuff. Very interesting. And then the dungeon, they're talking about 10 feet squares, even though the hilarious thing is that pretty much none of D&D's contemporary maps are done in 10-foot squares. They're almost all done in 5-foot squares. So already it doesn't work. Very funny. Okie dokie. So we have special travel pace, which is just travel pace, but different. Then we're doing conversions about like fast paced and how many goes and how long does a spell last during that time period based off of the distance you go. Again, why are we measuring distance when we could just be measuring time? Because that's really the thing that we're interested in. It's just determining how long it takes you to go from one place to another, not necessarily the speed. The speed is the vector in how we figure out that time. So you could have just taken out the middle math and just done the time. Our second thing, visibility outdoors. I'm just making notes for us. Outdoors. And that's very interesting. So all it tells us is outdoors. You can see about 2 miles in any direction. Okay, that's great. On a clear day. Or the point where the trees, hills, and other obstruction block their view. Rain normally cuts maximum visibility down to 1 mile, and fog can cut it down between 100 and 300 feet. Okay, so this is somewhat important information, but it also assumes that you're starting encounters or looking for points of interest or something on a map. You're doing a hex crawl style map, which again, 5th edition really does not support. Really not made to do that. Really not important for them, but it's like, this is how I feel like when you look at this stuff, it's like, if you wanted to do that stuff, old grognard D&D heads, you could. Here are the rules to do that. We've buried them in here. There's not a useful table or anything that you can quickly reference it. It's all buried in paragraphs that you're going to have to pick out. But also the visibility outdoors doesn't talk anything about, at this point, perception. Even though both of these things create concealment, which is really the issue. So it's not only that you can't see, it's that also you can't make out details. So I'm going to put it in here, and this is primarily about distance. On a clear day, the characters can see 40 miles if they are atop a mountain or a tall hill. How tall? I don't know. There's actually math that goes into that. The math's not that important, though. They could have also just given us a table that did that math for us. You can find things on like visibility things online that'll let you know, hey, what elevation are you at? What elevation is the thing that you're looking at? That gives you an idea of how far you can see. Again, if that's important to you, would be probably helpful. I probably should make something like that for my own hex crawling stuff, because I was thinking about doing the county hex and upwards hex crawling, because it's very easy at league level, which is about 2 nautical miles, so 2 and some change miles. To be like, okay, you can probably be able to identify the biomes of every hex that's around you, assuming you have pretty good visibility. I don't have any problems with that. But once you get up to something like the county level where it's 10 nautical miles, well, unless you again have this like point of height, how would you know what's nearby? And I was like, technically you wouldn't. But having that base standard where you can see 2 miles of visibility without anything that's going on, I like that. So I will probably just steal that. So basically what I'm finding out is that I didn't know what I was doing, but I somehow have back-ended my way into what is very close to what the official rules are. Just funny. Alright, noticing other creatures indoors. Outdoor visibility. Vision might be limited by light sources. First time we talk about light in here. To hear. We'll put like seeing and hearing. It's kind of a subset here. I would put a subset under visibility outdoors, though it is also indoors. See and hear creatures. Tracking. Choose their path. It's a wisdom survival check to follow them. Might require trackers to make a new check in any of the following circumstances, so go ahead and put down here like tracking, and I would say extended tracking. The tracking DC's table. Did you tell us where the table was? You did not. Great design, guys. Where is the tracking DC's table? Give me a number for the table number or what page it's on. No. Nope. Very useful. Oh, I mean, I guess I'm a fool. It's on the same page. So silly. Alright. I should read the next paragraph down, I suppose. Alright, soft surface. So it kind of gives you some basic DCs. And each day since the creature passed, which it really increases the DC very quickly. Here you go, tracking checks, DCs, and extended tracking, which is kind of this stuff up here where they're talking about when do you stop tracking and start resuming it. How much tracking do you guys do in your games? I feel like I don't do the tracking very often. We've done in the solo RPG as they were trying to, in the very beginning, follow the would-be kidnapper to try to figure out where Kristoff and Gertrude were trying to follow that druid that fled the scene. But otherwise, I feel like I don't do a lot of tracking. And I think that's, for me, when you're looking at something like an adventure design and you're considering tracking, is it has that same bottlenecking aspect of like a door that's really, really difficult to open. Where it's like, if you're in a dungeon and the player group screws up the door and they can't get through the door and the door is the only way to get to the rest of the dungeon, then you have killed the adventure because they're not able to proceed in it. In the same way, if tracking is important to the adventure, you have to be able to let them track it. They have to be successful in that action. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have checks and you can't have consequences for that, but you have to change it. Instead of being a binary pass or fail, it becomes a, well, you fail, so it takes a long time, or it takes resources, or you get some misinformation out of it, or there is some consequence to that action. The consequence isn't just you aren't able to track the creatures, because if that happens, then the adventure stops. Same way with the door, where it's like, oh, you try to, let's say, pick this locked door or whatever it is. Rogue fails at it, and you're like, okay. The thing is not that you don't get it open. You will get it open, but this is just a more complex or is a really gummed up lock or whatever the reason is, you're taking way more time than it usually does for you to open a door. It's been locked. So in that interim, I'm going to do things like I'm going to make some rolls for random encounters to be like, you guys spend significant amount of time here. And because of that, there's a chance that monsters in the dungeon might wander across you while you're here. And you might have accidentally get into another combat that you weren't prepared to get into. And that whittles away some of your resources, or I might make a bargain with the player and be like, you can get through it right now, but at the chance you're going to have to force it, and you're going to screw up like the pry bar for your thieves tools or whatever. And so maybe you'll be like, you don't get to add the proficiency to it until you get your thieves tools repaired or something. If somebody has the mending spell, then maybe they can do that. That also takes time, so maybe we make an encounter check, etc. So there are options that you can do to have some amount of failure that's not just you don't succeed, if that's going to stop the adventure. And we go right into social interactions. Yeah, I guess that's a good name for this. So I just had social down. Let's go social interaction. And again, this is 5E. So, right now, That's all they told us about exploration in the 5e basic Dungeon Master's Guide, which is very interesting. It's only about exploration's only about wilderness exploration. We're not talking about like overland travel. We're not talking about dungeon crawling. It's only about moving through wilderness in a very hex crawl style. Doing things that are relevant to hex crawls or finding an adventure site or something like that. So very interesting. You'll notice in all of this, and this is kind of the point that I'm driving out by doing this stream and looking at this stuff, none of this tells you how to make a meaty encounter, like how we create combat encounters. There's no framework for how to do this stuff, which is one of the things that we're looking at. There is some of this other stuff in here that would probably, I would also throw under exploration, maybe. Over here in the sidebar that we can look at where we have some other topics. So we'll probably look at some of that as well. But let's look at our social interaction. So the adventures usually have a goal. Some DMs prefer to run a social interaction as a free-form role-playing exercise where dice rarely come into play. Other DMs prefer to resolve the outcome of the interaction by having characters make charisma checks. Either way works. And most games fall somewhere in between, balancing player skill, the role-playing and persuading aspect, and the character skill reflected by ability checks. So it's still very much like roll, or basically it's some mixture of roleplay and roleplay. Like, once I show you what I'm looking at. And again, doesn't really give us any general advice as to what to do about that. Go ahead and get the stuff I have over here on the right. So it's a personal DM mix of roleplay, being inhabiting these characters and doing those things, and roleplay, rolling the dice for charisma checks or intimidation, persuasion, etc. Player's Handbook provides guidelines for balancing role-playing and ability checks in a social interaction. Okay, which we don't have pulled up, but I have looked at this before. If I remember correctly, the way that it says to do this, they're basic guidelines, and I'm going to freeform this. I'm pretty sure it's not even worth me pulling up because I'm pretty sure I remember this very, very closely. Basically, you have a starting attitude. Have like NPC starting attitude. Checks to improve attitude during the course of that conversation or interaction. And then a final charisma check is done by one PC as it's lined out there. One PC to succeed, or let's say to pass fail. And that is pretty much it. We could pull it up, but I am very certain that that is exactly what it says. I was looking at this last week. I was thinking about this stuff when I was originally thinking about this idea of maybe this is something I wanted to stream and talk about. And I looked at the basic like PHP rules. I was like, oh, there's not a lot here. So yeah, they have their starting attitude. Same thing here. Much of the structure will be invisible to your players in play and isn't meant to substitute for role-playing. So you have your starting attitude. They're friendly, they're indifferent, they're hostile. So you get 3 different ones, which is not a lot. Friendly, different, So you set that up first. There's a conversation that happens, and you're looking at changing the attitudes, which is I found was very strange. I was like, I don't think about that as being the way to do it at all. But here we go. That somehow in the conversation is more about changing the NPC's feelings rather than striving to get the goal of what you want. It just that doesn't quite line up in my brain. Maybe it's just a me thing though. So the attitude might change over the course of conversation, the interaction perhaps. They can make a hostile creature indifferent. So this is really to improve temporary attitude, which is very interesting. Or temporarily improve. Conversation/checks temporarily improve attitude. So with the idea being that it will go back to that after this interaction is done. Need to succeed on one or more challenging charisma checks to convince a hostile creature to do anything on their behalf. That said, a hostile creature might be so ill-disposed towards the party that no charisma check can improve its attitude, in which case any attempt to sway it through diplomacy fails automatically. So I think we're starting to see a little bit of the wheels kind of coming off the cart here. Like, this is how you do it, except sometimes that won't make sense. And also, anything that you do within this will be temporary and won't have any meaningful change in the long run. Yeah, whether the adventurers shift a creature's attitude is up to you, ultimately. As with pretty much all of 5th edition's Dungeon Master advice, it's like, do this, or maybe don't, or whatever. It's up to you, it's your game. Do what you want. We're not really going to give you any strong recommendations one way or the other. They don't understand their creature's ideal bonds or flaws. Do that utilizing ideal, bond, and flaw. Thus meaning that what they're kind of telling you is that anytime that you want to make these interactions with an NPC, you need to be prepared to create an ideal bond and flaw for every NPC that they're having a meaningful conversation like this where they're trying to achieve a goal. Which seems like a real pain in the butt as a Dungeon Master. I will be very honest. I basically don't use this framework at all. I don't use ideal bond or flaw for NPCs. And outside of maybe the first handful of PCs I ever made back in 2014, or maybe even in D&D Next before 2014, before the release, I found them to not be a very useful part of a character sheet, and I just have never gone back to them and never felt like I was getting a lesser game experience because of it. It seemed like they were things that were just not used. So you can do insight checks. Uncover. And given time, the adventurers can also learn about the creature's characteristics from other sources. Talking to friends and allies, personal letters, publicly told stories. Acquiring such information might be the basis of an entirely different set of social interactions. So now you're doing multiple social interactions for one social interaction. You can also do sort of secondary research. For the combo. I like this. I wish what I'd like to see is something like this turned into like an actual framework about like how you would approach that from an adventure aspect. So I'm writing an adventure. I need to convince the captain of the guard to the adventure that's jumping to my mind is Sokol Keep, and you need to convince, is it like the Flaming Fist captain, like watch captain, to give you passage out to the lighthouse, I think. It's something like that. It's been a while since I've looked at that adventure, even though I do like it. So but it also doesn't really have a ton of framework to do that. It would be cool to have something that's a little bit more like this framework could be like, hey, if you want to find out more stuff about this, giving me the tools as a dungeon master to be like, oh, so here's the framework. If you guys want to learn more about this guy, that'll give you a better chance to be able to convince him when you have this conversation, figuring out his ideals, his bonds, his flaws, what things might motivate him, because he's very disinterested when you talk to him in the adventure. So if you find out a way to maybe like be able to quickly move him into a more favorable light where he is friendly and he's maybe able to give you some more stuff, give you some more supplies, maybe give you something else, maybe he'll increase your reward or something like that, that would be really cool. That's the sort of stuff that I'm looking for, is like, I want to take this, what's being described to me here in the DMG, and turn that into something I can actually use. Villagers get to the point of their request, demand, or suggestion. It's kind of like that. The request, demand, or suggestion. Yeah, so in the end, the way that they have it mechanically is that all of this boils down to essentially making a single check. One character makes one check. Any character who has actively participated in the conversation can make the check. So it's not a group check. It's an individual check. One PC makes this check, which is unfortunate. Again, like, I want just like the entire group is involved in a combat encounter. I think that the entire party should be involved in any sort of social interaction encounter. I think it's very easy for everybody to take a step back and then the one charisma character to take a step forward and handle all face duties. But that's just not very realistic. It's not very realistic to how things work in the world, is that if you had a group of people ask you for something and 4 of those people stood in the back while one person talked to you, you'd think that that was weird. It would be weirdly off-putting. They were all just staring at you while one person talked to you, and if you tried to ask them questions, they would just refer you back to the one person who speaks for the group. That would feel weird. The other thing is that it's unfulfilling. That's like, what, 3 or 4 people sitting around the table for maybe anywhere from 5 to maybe 20 minutes while one player has a conversation with the DM. That's not fun. Nobody wants to do that. I want to get everybody involved as much as possible. It's okay. I would rather lower the DCs and make it more likely for the group to be able to pass it, knowing that, sure, I can throw a DC 12 charisma check, a DC 12 for charisma checks into that situation, knowing that the bard or whatever is going to roll like a 27. Great, it's still one success. But it's like, are the 3 of the rest of you chuckleheads going to be able to make this check or not? What sort of chicanery, what sort of stuff can you pull out of your butt to make this happen? What kind of arguments can you do? Like, come on, play the game. Let's do the thing. Let's do the role playing. I want to see that stuff. Then we have this conversation reaction. Long table. Put this down here. Kind of falls in here. Conversation. Again, you can have the same issue here. So, if you've gotten the person to friendly, even if you hit only DC 0, so assuming you don't have a -1 and roll a 1, or have a -2, and so you actually can't fail this. So the creature does as at, assuming that you're playing by the rules and you're not rolling for dice and you didn't just have just a terrible charisma score where you have somebody with like a -3 charisma trying to make this check and they roll like a 2, so you actually end up with a -1 final score. So DC 0. Friendly creatures gonna do as they are asked without taking any risk or making any sacrifices. Indifferent creatures offer no help, do no harm. And hostile creatures, they oppose the adventurer's actions and might take risks to do so. So it just kind of scales up. So it's 0 for friendly creatures. They're going to do the thing as much as they can without any sort of personal cost to themselves. Indifferent creatures, you got to beat a DC 10. Let's be honest, that's pretty easy when only one person in the group has to make it, assuming that anybody is trained and probably has a positive charisma modifier, even if it's a +1. That gives you like a +3 to the roll. So you're mostly going to pass that. Also, is it interesting if they don't pass it? Like, is there a way forward in the adventure? Or again, is this another weird bottleneck? So that's one of the big things that we think we're missing. So where's the thing that we could put this down here? Same thing down here, like avoiding. Bottleneck failures. Do that. So I'm just putting these notes up here. Stuff that we're missing right now. Bottleneck failures. Combat also has that, but the idea, what's different about what we've looked at in exploration and social interaction thus far compared to combat, combat requires all the creatures getting KO'd and or dying. Which if they're dying, there's no more adventure anyways, because you're dead. Unless you're going to run like something where they're undead or they're trying to get back to life. Which is totally cool. Definitely run that adventure. That sounds very fun. It's a fun way to deal with a full party kill. Total party kill. But the party totally wipes, have them go back, grab it, do all that fun stuff. Highly endorse. But it requires a whole bunch of failures and requires a whole bunch of stuff to go wrong for that to happen. In these explorations, whether it's like tracking or having this conversation with an NPC, it's all of it in the end rides on failing just one check. Failing a combat generally requires a cascade of failures. It's not one thing that's going to be doing it, unless it's, you know, you're fighting something that's got like a disintegration ray or something like that, or a fireball, and you guys are a low level, and you're just like, it didn't really matter if you passed it or not. You didn't have enough hit points to live through it. You guys were gonna die, which is more of a design problem. That one's gonna be on the DM. That one's gonna hang on the DM. If you throw super powerful enemies at them and put them in a situation where they will just die, don't do that. And the same reason that we want to avoid these other bottles. Okay. Aiding the check. Other characters who make the substantial contribution would influence the interaction in a positive way. The characters making the charisma check can do so with advantage. This is where stuff kind of gets murky for me. I realize that my fat head is in the way. I think it's going to be... Sorry. My fat head will just be in the way. Here, actually. That way you'll be it. No. Well. I'll just read. Other characters who make substantial contributions. What quantifies as substantial? Also, if I made substantial contributions to the conversation, wouldn't that adjust the temporary attitude? Isn't that the whole point of that? Help and render one final check. The substantial input from a PC can or advantage or disadvantage on the final check. Which on paper that sounds great. That sounds like, yeah, that's a very easy trap to get caught in with the advantage disadvantage mechanic. Be like, oh yeah, well if I try to help this person, I make a check to help them. If I succeed, they get advantage, and if I fail, they get disadvantage. Well, you need to know the DC of that and whether it's worth helping you in the beginning as to whether you even want to attempt that, because there's nothing worse than your friend at the table trying to help you and they end up hindering you. It's not fun. There's actually, and I think you'll notice as you go into more and more 5th edition, that they don't do as much of this kind of stuff. And that's something that came out in like these first books, and then they're like, yeah, that's actually not a fun mechanic. You'll see less and less of that. And multiple checks. Certain situations might call for more than one check, particularly if the adventurers come into interactions with multiple goals. Potentially can use multiple checks. Notice it doesn't say group checks, it says multiple checks. Or multiple goals, essentially, is what they want. Repeat, once a charisma check has been made, further attempts to influence the target just don't work. So it truly is like one and done. It's a one and done check. Role playing. This is just stuff that talks about role playing. All good, but not necessarily engaging players. Yes, which is exactly what we talked about. Make sure everyone has something to do during a roleplay heavy game session. And not just a game session, just any encounter. I've talked about the current campaign that I run right now, and the current campaign I run right now, my players like to split up like crazy. They are often off in 1s and 2s. And so what that means functionally is that if I have 4 players and each of them splits up, what ends up happening realistically at the table as to how the game plays is that I get to play D&D for 4 hours because I'm running the game, but each one of them gets to play D&D for 1 hour and watches D&D being played for 3 hours. That's not good. I try really hard to avoid that. I try to give them things that they can do in that scene where they play NPCs or do something else, or try to hop back and forth as much as I can rather than play it out, but it is a lot of work to make that happen. And it would just be better if, honestly, my players stayed together more often. That is just how it goes. Yeah, you do want to engage the players, appeal to player preferences. This is very much just the player types over again. Target specific characters. So it does say to target specific characters. To try to involve everybody. In RP heavy session. Again, not individual scenes, but in the entire session. If the entire session has a lot of role play in it, you want to make sure that they get involved. Then we go back down to objects. So we went from exploration into social interaction, then to objects, which is either going to be exploration or combat. Since we're getting closer to combat, I'm going to be putting it, because most of this stuff is about hitting things or destroying items. So I'm going to put that in the combat category. Put in. You know what? I'll say damaging. Damaging objects. Because that's primarily what this is about. Let me go back full screen. That's primarily what we're talking about here. Yeah, my stupid head's in the way. How often are your players, do you use like this object armor class table? Not very often. I rarely come across times when players really want to destroy an object in a way in which knowing its AC is important. Usually it's in a non-combat situation where they're like, oh, I want to cut through this rope. Do you have a sharp blade? Yes. You cut through the rope. It's unless you are pressed for time and I need to know like its specific hit points, you're going to do the thing. If it seems reasonable, you should be able to do it, then you do it. Same thing with like lifting a portcullis or something like that. It's like, do you guys have positive strength modifiers and there's like 4 of you? Yeah, you guys are going to be able to lift the portcullis given enough time. You'll figure it out. You guys are smart. If you have a fulcrum or something that you want to do, I'll let you do it even easier or do it without that many people. But unless you are pressed for time, like say there's a whole bunch of orcs charging down the hallway towards you and you're like, we need to lift this portcullis. I always use like orcs and goblins as an example. Let's not do that. You have triggered a trap or whatever, and now there's a torrent of water that's rushing down this hallway, and you need to get the portcullis up before you guys get crushed against it with the water that's running through the passage, and you will drown in here. Cool. If that's the case, now you're under tension. Now it's important to know your ability to pick it up. But none of that is dealing with what these rules are for object interactions. It's about destroying things. Damage thresholds, and then we have combat. Go right into combat. Going for stuff. So we have initiative. That's the important thing. I really don't run initiative the way that it is anymore. They're like hidden list, visible list. And I don't know. I don't think it's particularly interesting to do visible list. I think, or doing hidden list. I generally just do a visible list. Mainly because if it's a hidden list and people really want to know what it is, by the end of round 1, they know the initiative order, they'll just write it down. So unless you're re-rolling initiative every round, which you shouldn't do because that makes combat even slower, just use a visible list. It's fine. In fact, now one of the things that we have been doing is running fast and slow rounds, which is a very sneaky way of, we're essentially doing just side-based initiative. But the way that I run it is that I just make all the monsters take 10 on initiative. So it's 10 plus whatever their initiative modifier is, so I don't have to roll it, and so I can instead focus on just writing down stuff. Grouping monsters as same type monsters as usual. Doing that, hey, everybody who beat that, so if I have 3 PCs who reach above whatever where the monsters go, they can act in any order they want. I don't care. And then the monsters are going to go, then whoever's down at the bottom can act in whatever order they want to. Back to the top, and act in whatever order you want to. Then the monsters go. Then it's the bottom. You can act in whatever order these people want to in the bottom of the initiative. What I found is that it does a lot more teamworky stuff when people are like, oh, they can be more fluid about when they take their turns. But also they're not trying to do that across when the monster's initiative is. Everybody knows like, oh, I want to do this thing so I can do a trip attack But I don't want to be the last person who goes, because if I do a trip attack right before the monsters go, they just stand back up and nobody gets the benefit of them being prone. Like, okay, then you'll go first and try to do a trip attack on the monster. I go first, I knock this thing prone, now everybody has advantage on it with their melee attacks. Perfect, great, everybody's happy, there's high fives all around, and when the monster's turn comes up, guess what, they stand up. It doesn't play all that different, but it does give the players more tactical options. So even though combat isn't necessarily any faster or slower doing this way, it does make it a little bit way more engaging for those people, for everybody who's playing, because it's not mostly them sitting around waiting for their turn. It's them having a discussion about who wants to go and what are we going to do during that time period. Index card, tracking monster hit points. Okay. Great. Using and tracking conditions. Okay. So stuff that's in here. So we have initiative. We're going to have conditions. Critical hits. I guess we should put failures in that. Improvising damage. Improvising damage is super important. I feel like it doesn't actually come up in combat most of the time. I feel like I use it most of the time in exploration or outside of combat. This is actually probably the best table that's in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide. So if you're not using these tables between damage severity and level and improvising damage, you should be. I used a slightly modified because I didn't like the way it scales. It goes 1, 2, 4, 10, 18, 24. And just like the severity and level down at the bottom, you can see it goes 1, 2, 4, 10, 18, 24. And so that's hard to internalize. So you always need to be looking at the actual table. I swapped it, and it's almost exactly the same. It's just X D10 plus X, where X is equal to the level of the party. If you're first level, you're taking that 1d10 plus 1 damage. If you're 20th level, you're taking 20d10 plus 20 damage. It comes out mathematically very close to what these amounts do already, and it's way easier for me to remember in my head. But I only use a d10 if it's only targeting one creature. This is... I don't think it's in this section. I think it's in this section in Dungeon Master's Workshop, where it talks about creating spells. Where it talks about that. In that area, it tells you very specifically, hey, if you're doing something that's targeting one creature, maybe use a d10. If you're targeting something that targets multiple creatures or is an area effect, do d6s. So if you were targeting all of them with some sort of trap that got set off, and they were a 3rd level, instead of everybody taking 3d10 plus 3, it's 3d6 plus 3. It changes out so that it's less likely that it's going to wipe the whole party. It's okay to wipe one character because then the rest of the party can like grab them and do whatever they need to do. But what you don't want to do is accidentally roll high and wipe the whole party on like a poison arrow trap, and you're like, well, that was dumb. But I also want it to be enough damage that it could, if you weren't at full hit points, absolutely KO you. So it really rides that line very well, because a D8 is the most common or average hit die for all the classes. So if you do D6 and D10, you're on either side of it. So it's very dangerous for one target when they're targeted. It's also pretty dangerous for most people if everybody's targeted, and especially if the group has not had a short rest and healed all the way up. So yeah, I'm gonna put down here. I mean, I guess I put it under here because it's under the combat section. Improvising damage. So again, being submerged in lava, being hit by a crashing flying fortress, tumbling into a vortex of fire on the elemental plane of fire, being crushed in the jaws of a godlike creature or moon-sized monster like an astral dreadnought, hit by falling rubble in a collapsing tunnel, stumbling into a vat of acid, poisoned needles, falling bookcase, struck by lightning, tumbling into a fire pit. These are the sort of things that I feel like, even from the descriptions, are more likely to come up when we're doing exploration stuff and not in the middle of a fight. Sure, if maybe you're fighting some bandits or something in the ruins of an old keep, and one of them pushes a bookcase over on your player, but you might go, he's only doing 1d10 damage with that. Why would he be doing that instead of just hitting me with his scimitar that's going to do very similar damage and is probably going to be easier for them to be successful at? Trying to make an attack roll rather than like a strength check to push over a bookcase. So it is a little thing where I often feel like this should go under exploration. You have areas of effect. This is probably one I don't use very often. I should probably use it. So. Targets in AoEs. And this is primarily for theater of the mind. Because you don't need this information if you're playing on a grid map. Handling mobs. I don't use the handling mobs stuff either. Mainly because 5e, we know that when it comes to 5e, that primarily the difficulty in combats comes from the stacked number. It's the action economy. So it's more about which side ends up having the most actions, because the math is so flat. So if you're putting a dozen, like they say, dozens of monsters on one side, they're gonna wipe the party in a lot of circumstances just because they have so many attacks. And the likelihood that they're going to crit will be significantly higher. This is a situation in which, rather than doing that, what I would do would be create basically a swarm creature. And instead of doing attack rolls, what I'd probably do would be like, whoever's next to the swarm needs to make dexterity saving throws. A little bit better. So that way when they miss, they still take half damage, because like you can't avoid 12 plus attacks. That math just math very well. Like you're gonna get hit, but you might not get hit very hard. But it feels like a swarm is always going to be doing some amount of damage to you. Using miniatures, this stuff is important, but it's not the crux of what we're looking at. But I mean, I guess we have some miniatures. Because one of the things that we are looking at is how many more rules there are with things like combat, which already we're pretty much filling out. We've got line of sight. And we're going to have optional rules. Flanking. Even talks to you about hexes, which is very interesting. Diagonals. Facing. Then we have a different section, which is chase it, which is its own thing. So that's the end of the combat section. But you can see already the difference. So we have how many here? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, plus other stuff, plus some of that sub stuff. In exploration, we've got 5 things, including targets and AoEs, which is, you know, why did I put this under exploration? This is absolutely here. Where was that? I definitely just put that in the wrong area. Right before the mobs, right? So even higher than that. And we look at 5e stuff for exploration, you got 4 entries. Look down here for social interactions, 2 to 3 kind of. This one's really more advice and actual rules. And even these guidelines are just kind of a mix. Pretty much when you look at all these aren't really rules. These are the only rules that you have in here. And even them, they are guidelines, not rules. So it's a lot of advice and not a lot of how do you do the thing. Specifically. So we have chases down here, which they've set off as their own things, but I would put those, and I'm going to do this because this is how I view that. A chase is an exploration scene. It's about jumping over things, it's about chasing after people, it's about movement and moving through the environment. That's not really combat. Can you shoot off spells and do that sort of stuff? Yes. Also doesn't talk about flights, but that's alright. I think maybe it has some lip surface at the end where it's like, oh, also the player characters can also be chased by stuff. In case you forgot about that. I don't like these rules, honestly. I've looked at these rules before and went, I'm not following those. So you have a beginning a chase, and running. The nice thing is that it actually is giving us a framework to do the thing, which is the thing that I was concerned about with most of the stuff. Dashing, spells and attacks. Ending a chase. Chase complications. Which I think is the more interesting aspect of chases. Down here. I think it's just urban and wilderness. So if you want to chase somebody in the city versus chasing somebody out in the wild. And a little thing on designing your own chase tables, which is really nice. Splitting up. Mapping the chase. I don't know why these are all feel like they are. The way that D&D does headings, it makes it seem like all of these should be under chase complications. They're subheads. And then, yeah, at the end, they have role reversal. Here, I'll just put, that's a flight. Where you, the PCs, are fleeing from something. Then we get into weird stuff like siege equipment. You can tell me down in the comments if you've ever used siege equipment in your games. I have not. I don't think I've used in all of the D&D from 2014, 5th edition, 5.5 up to now. I don't think I have ever, I certainly not run any siege equipment, but I don't think that I have played in any sessions where we've even come across them. I remember playing in a game where we had a battle wagon, but that was Pathfinder. That was many years ago. And I've definitely used some siege equipment in 4th edition. Hacking like a big tower. I don't think I've done any of that in 5th edition. So you start to look at the like, is that important? to say for most games, it's probably not. So siege equipment, I would put under combat. It is for combat. Then you have diseases and I think I would put poisons under combat. I think that's most likely where you're going to come across them. But I would put diseases under exploration. I do miss the fourth edition write-ups for disease and their implementation. Fourth edition diseases were a lot like how 2014's exhaustion rules work, where like things get worse progressively at a nice clip of steps. They do that here. They're just not used a ton. Because it used to be they give you like a nice little table, be like, hey, if you roll this, if it goes worse and you take another degree, another point of poison, then it becomes this. Yeah, any creature that starts its turn within 10 feet of the infected creature gets the throws of mad laughter, must succeed on DC 10 con save, throw, or become this cackle fever. Once a creature succeeds on this save, it is immune to the mad laughter of that particular infected creature for 24 hours. So not immune to cackle fever. Cackle fever is really nasty in 5th edition, actually. Like really nasty. You can kill a whole party with this. Because if you have one person that's infected and another person saves, again, they only save for like 24 hours. But it takes 1d4 hours for them to manifest. So in that time, they'll have probably given it to another person in the party, and then then the original PC who made the save can be infected from that PC, but they're not going to know that PC has it until a few hours later. So it's very easy, like if one person in the party gets it, you can really damage the entire party very quickly. Because you don't get to make the save again until the end of your long rest. On a successful save, the DC for this save and for the saves to avoid an attack of mad laughter drops by 1d6. So, guaranteed to take you 3 days to get over it, by the way. At a minimum. More likely with 3.5, it's going to be about 4 days more likely for you to get over it. So it's a lot. It happens a lot. It's tough. Also, kind of not the most fun mechanic in the world. Maybe that's just me. But kind of not the most fun mechanic. Yeah, and then we have poisons, and now poisons can be given in a lot of different ways. So, but the ones that I feel like you come across most are going to be contact and injury, which are very, very, very combat heavy usually, and then ingested or inhaled, which are probably going to be either social or exploration. So it's kind of hard to drop poison into an area, but the one that I feel like the most likely you are to come across poison is probably something like drowse poison, which is injury. That's what you're going to come across, or the venom of monsters, and mostly that's done through contact or injury. Crafting and harvesting poison. I would put that under exploration though. Because that's a cool thing that you can do. Madness, and the madness of 5th edition's take on madness is a little funky. Doesn't come up very often. I kind of the rules are not super well regarded as to how they maybe approach things like real world things like mental illness. So, you know, it is what it is. But I'm also not going to try to take Call of Cthulhu stuff and then try to retroactively make it back into D&D. Again, I just don't think that madness works in the genre or tone that D&D is trying to do with heroic fantasy. And it's kind of all over the place because madness effects can be social, they can be combat, they can be exploration. They're kind of their own thing, especially short-term madness. So when in doubt, if you don't know where to put it, I'm more likely to put it in exploration, because exploration is kind of the catch-all for everything that is not a social interaction and not a combat. And because the long-term and short-term madnesses are things that you would be dealing with in adventure, or something like indefinite madness would be something like a downtime thing. You know what? Because of that, I'll put it under downtime. We don't have anything under downtime yet, so let's put it there. But does include things that are like short, long, indefinite. But would primarily be that. And then we have a weird little note down here at the bottom about experience points. Let's see, experience points. This might actually be important for the point that we're kind of looking at. Experience points fuel a level advancement for player characters and are mostly rewarded for completing combat encounters. This is a very difference that, if we look at other editions of D&D, you will see how the rules are changed to encourage or inhibit certain styles of play. In everything that we're going to look at, everything's going to be like this. It's very much going to be specifically, hey, you primarily get experience points by killing monsters. But if you look like an old school D&D, it's about getting gold back to the settlement, going into dungeons, gathering wealth, and getting it home safely. So killing monsters are an obstacle in the way of you getting to the experience points, which are also gold. So it's both your wealth and your ability to buy new gear and magic items and etc., but also your XP. So it's all about getting gold. When you switch and the primary means of getting experience points becomes monsters, you start to see that the combat portion of the game starts to become way more important. So there are a lot more rules. If you look up here, there are a lot more rules around around combat, suddenly. Or if you look at really old school D&D, combat's pretty simplistic. There's not a lot going on with it at times. It's really deadly, and because it's super deadly, most people are often trying to avoid it because they don't get anything out of it. Sure, the monsters might have some loot on them, but really what you're trying to find is like their treasury, their hoard, there's something. If we think about like The Hobbit and like Smaug, and you look at Smaug and be like, we could kill the dragon, but really all we want is the treasure. So as long as the dragon goes away, or we find a safe way, such as, you know, turning invisible with a very specific ring, and you're able to just grab some treasure and come out of it, that's way less risky than trying to go toe-to-toe with a powerful mythical beast. So why would you do that? Especially when you don't even get experience points if you kill it. And so I think that's worth noting down here. Actually, you know what? Up here at the top. Anything here. NIST post. Post EXP. is derived from completing combat encounters. Killing, routing, or capturing monsters. And then it even says in here, in Chapter 3, creating adventures provides guidelines for designing combat encounters using experience points. So that's a good point. We're at the down at the bottom where they're like, oh, adventuring options, where you're adding more stuff in, like fear and horror and healing and doing the stuff, some different combat options. So you have initiative variants, speed factor, action options, other things you can do in combat other than just making attacks, which is worth putting down here. So we'll put down combat options. Which is really, I think that's initiative variance is whatever. We already kind of talked about that. Covered under initiative for me. But combat action option. The different things that you can do. Disarming, climbing onto big creatures, marking, which was an old 4th edition thing that's really great mechanic for making especially fighters really stand out. And then how to create monsters, how to create spells, how to create magic items, new character options, all that kind of stuff. I guess under here I would also put, under exploration, I would put creating dungeons or random dungeons, which is its own side thing that you can do down here in the appendix A. Unlikely to need it, but just in case. So let's look at creating adventures. Rewards of being a dungeon master, blah blah blah. Elements of a great adventure. Credible threat. Yeah, that's basically stakes. Like, if you don't do this, something will happen. We kind of go into it. Familiar tropes with a clever twist. Sure. A clear focus on the present. It's not something that's happened in the past. It's not something that's going to happen. It needs to be something that's actionable right now. Making the heroes matter. Like, the heroes are the other one that can do that. That's, for me, that's very credible threat. Surprises is very similar to tropes with twists. Something that won't be that they're at the beginning of the adventure, you're not necessarily going to know how that adventure. Useful maps, weird thing to put in there. And then they kind of give you an adventure structure. Adventure should have beginnings, middles, and ends. Yes. Sure. And then 2 types. I like the adventure structure where it's just like a paragraph. Exciting and focused is what the beginning should be. And you should get some sort of hook that piques the interest of the players, provides compelling reason for their characters to become involved. Yep. What are those? How do you do them? Maybe we'll tell you here later on in the chapter. The middle is the bulk of the adventure. With their adversaries. Get more understanding about what's going on. And in the end, you should have that big climax, which in most adventures is usually some sort of big boss fight. But it doesn't have to be that. It could be some sort of race or a negotiation, or it could be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be one of those things, though it is very often that. In fact, if you really wanted to make things different, it would be not making it a fight. In fact, maybe making the fight kind of a failure state. Dungeon goals, wilderness goals, for our location-based adventures. there is a nice piece by, I think it's Angry GM from who knows how many years ago. It talks about if you really want it to be, everything can be a dungeon. And that tends to be, after reading that many years ago, be like, oh yeah, you can just kind of run wilderness, those locations, as dungeons. A hallway in a dungeon is not that dissimilar from following a path in a forest, or a footprints through the forest, tracking it down a path. It's really not very different. You have your different areas where you suppose scenes are going to be, and you probably have an idea of whether those are going to be combat scenes, a general idea about when like a random encounter might happen. And sure, the characters can go off the path in the wilderness if they're in a forest or whatever, but they still got to end up at one of the scenes. Is like that's saying they could also just get lost if they go off the path too. And you have the ways to adjudicate that. You could be like, well, you get kind of lost, or you randomly roll for a room that they kind of bump their way into, and now it's sort of like they got teleported to someplace else in the dungeon, and now they're not sure the way back, and they're not really sure the way forward. So probably should have stayed on the path unless you knew explicitly where you were going. Now, if they had something like some sort of like locate object or something like that, they kind of gave them a beeline as to where to go. Yeah, go off road, go for it. We'll go through there, and then we'll roll for some random encounters, or maybe some random hazards or things you can see as you kind of bushwhack through that. And maybe we'll find something, maybe it won't, maybe you'll, if that ends up being smart and you save time, I'll try to figure out some way that will impact whatever that final scene is. Like, oh, they're not expecting you, so they're not prepared for you. Or you catch them where they don't have as many guards around them, or whatever it is. Or if it takes you really long, now there's more people there to fight. Or maybe they've moved from that location somewhere else, or they have secured the MacGuffin or whatever you're after in a way that is really difficult to get to. So any of those can play into it. It's very easy to... I'm sorry, I said easy. That makes it feel like if you find that stuff difficult, or you're a new GM, Dungeon Master, or Game Master, and that seems overwhelming, that's not valid. It's totally valid. But it comes with experience to be like, oh, these are the sort of shenanigans that players get up to. You become very competent in the system. That's why I like having things like those improvised damage tables, and knowing, like, okay, when stuff happens, I know how to adjudicate a weird thing that they have tried to do. And now that we have to deal with in that situation. Just goals. I really don't, I'll be very honest, I don't like most of this book. I think I've made that probably clear by now. But I really don't like its adventure advice where it's like, you just need goals. And a villain, and maybe some allies and patrons, and an introduction, and a climax. And if you put all those things together, you magically have an adventure. And you're like, cool, but what are like all the encounters? How many encounters should I put in the middle of it? Where do I put fights? Where do I put traps and hazards and obstacles for them to overcome? I've got these allies, or I've got these NPCs and villains. Like, how do I put them in positions where they get talked to? How do I introduce the villain without the player's characters immediately trying to kill him or her or whoever it is? A lot of that stuff is really left out here. What I'm looking for is like a template. I think would be super useful for new dungeon masters. To be like, sort of like the 5-room dungeon. If you're not familiar with that, go look it up. The 5-room dungeon is a nice little template. It's like, hey, do you want to create an adventure that lasts like 1 session of play? Here's how you do it. It's got some exploration stuff in it. It's got some social stuff in it. It's got some combats in it. It's got a little trickery going on in it. And there's going to be some sort of climax or reward, with a reward at the end of it. Tells you where to put those things. Those 5 things should all be in relation to each other. There's little frameworks that you can find that be like how they're connected to each other. You can mix it up, so you don't always do them in order. It's a great sort of like first stepping stone in adventure design to be like, okay, once I've got my feet under me as to understanding how to do it, now that I know the basics, now I can break the mold and I can paint outside the lines. I can color outside the lines now. I understand what's going on and feel confident about doing that. Just sort of like I mean, art's a very good metaphor for that. It's like you learn the basics and foundations and elements of art very early on, so you can understand how to incorporate those things correctly and how to have proficiency in doing them. And then once you have those proficiencies, now they are the toolbox in which you use your creativity to break those rules, to bring up the surprises, to invert expectations and stuff. But it's very important that you understand the basics of how to do that thing first. That's why I want some sort of like template thing here. That would be really helpful. But we don't really get that. Event-based adventures, so location-based adventures, you go to a place and do a thing, like a dungeon delve. Event-based adventures are more like a Jack the Ripper kind of situation, where it's like, oh, somebody's being murdered around town, and you find out who's doing it and why before the next murder happens, or whatever the next event is. Crime sprees, all that stuff. Let's see if they give us anything better here. So you start with the villain. You know, what are they doing? There's also very villain focused, and you don't necessarily have to have a villain. If you wanted to make like a disaster scenario, you could do that. And in that case, you reframe something like a volcanic eruption or whatever, or like a tear in elemental chaos or something as being the villain. They don't act consciously, as in they have goals that they chase down, but they still act towards some sort of goal and sort of the meta structure of an adventure. That takes a little extra tweaking to get through, but if you run a few of these, you'll understand how to do that. Watch a few disaster movies and you'll kind of understand that framework once you start looking at it. Determine the villain's actions. Yeah, what do they want? What do the players want? Who are the important NPCs? Anticipate the villain's reaction. So once the villain recognizes that the player characters are trying to stop them, how do they react to that? This is usually where they change. I like to do, if I'm going to do this, do like a 2-step, which is one is like the general way in which they accomplish whatever it is they try to do. Let's say that they're doing things like they're trying to falsify an election. Let's get that out of the hat. They've got a person who's trying to do that. Primarily, the way they do that is probably by bribing or blackmailing or intimidating, extorting people who have some sort of agency in that situation. They do that. So, if the players come up against them, they recognize the players are a threat, they will try to do the same thing to the player characters first. They'll be like, oh, we'll give you a bunch of money to go away. Oh, if you do this, I know where, you know, your baby sister is. And, you know, just a very veiled threat and be like, well, it'd be terrible if something happened to them. That they might try to extort them in some other way. Find out some secret about the player characters and use that as leverage against them. And then you have a backup as like, when that fails, what do they do next? Do they resort to violence? Do they go to ground? Do they become more secretive? Do they use the influence they have over something like the local constable or sheriff to try to bar them in a legal way, try to get them kicked out of town, give that effect? Detail your key locations, blah, plan encounters. So this is the entire section that is basically like make the adventure, which is what I was talking about. It's kind of the problem I see with a lot of this stuff. You created the story. In the event-based adventure, encounters occur when the villain's agenda intersects the path of the characters. Be creating encounters later in this chapter for guidance on crafting individual encounters. Yes, I would love to. Take me there. Next is creating non-player characters, which is not super important for us. Here we go. Creating encounters. Side quests are just small adventures. So you need an objective. I noticed a lot of things in 5th edition do this thing. Well, they will talk about a generic encounter, And what they mean is a combat encounter most of the time. But they don't say combat encounter. You start to think, does this mean some sort of exploration scene? Does this mean a social scene? No, for the most part, it's pretty much always combat. Because they set it up as if they're going to tell you about different types of encounters, but they never do. It will always be a combat encounter. Even though some of these objectives don't line up with that. Like, make peace. Well, getting into a bunch of fights is probably not a great way to make peace. Sneaking in, getting into a bunch of fights, probably not a great way to sneak into some. Even though that's a very loose goal. This would be like your entire adventure is about, or maybe this encounter within the adventure is about sneaking through, like, what's a good example? In like the Dragon Queen sort of adventures, that the Dragon Cult has set up like a roadblock somewhere, and oh well, we need to get around the roadblock to get to our destination, and we do that by sneaking through it because they're like, oh, there's too many people, where actually getting into a combat would be very poorly for us. Because if you don't set it up very clear reasons why players shouldn't get into combat, they will probably try to make a combat encounter. Because if you look down at your character sheet, most of your stuff is combat oriented. So they're going to try to... They have a hammer. They want to make situations look like nails. So you really need to be like, nope, this is not a nail. This is not something you use your hammer on. You can do that, but it's going to go very poorly for you. You should probably try something. Right, because it goes to creating encounters, then suspiciously creating combat encounter down here at the bottom. So we would definitely put that under our combat as. Create combat encounter. Important because we're not going to find any other thing in here. Multi-party encounters on a budget. I'm just going to call this combat encounter. I'm just going to call this encounter building. And after that, we're going to talk about random encounters. This is where D&D does a real disservice, is that it doesn't give you a good reason as to why you use random encounters. Like a lot of Dungeon Masters, I was not big on random encounters for a long time. I was like, oh, random encounters are so bad. It's really more of a naming problem than anything. Like, because I think I've had the experience that everybody else has, certainly playing, not as much running, though I have done it certainly early on in my DM career. I don't do it really as much anymore. Being like, oh, trying to get from one area to another, and Dungeon Masters, well, I want some amount of gameplay to be in there, so what do? I throw a combat encounter on the road. Combat encounter doesn't really have any stakes. There's no real reason to get in a fight with these people, other than it's like, ha, bandits jump out on the roadside and like, give us your money or we'll stab you. And you have a little scuffle, you waste like 30 minutes doing this combat encounter that doesn't really get you anywhere in the adventure that you're trying to go, doesn't really give you any good loot. You're like, cool, we just kind of wasted time instead of doing the adventure we were trying to do. And when you look through it with that lens, you're like, oh, yeah, that's not good. That's not good. Like, that's... You understand why people don't like random encounters. Instead of random encounters really is that they're wandering monsters, which is a better name for them. And it's really about applying tension or pressure to a situation. Like I was talking about with the locked door situation earlier. The failure of not being able to unlock the door is not that you can't unlock the door. You can try as many times as you want, because I need you to get through the door to get to the rest of the adventure. So every time you fail, there's a chance you might get into an encounter. Those wandering monsters that come by, that you have a combat encounter or you need to hide from, you don't even have to fight them. It's the thing, it becomes the risk of doing that situation. So when you do that, you get into a fight, the fight cuts at your resources. D&D at its core, very clear in old editions of D&D. Less, it's obfuscated a lot more in modern D&D. Is that it is a game, regardless of whether we want it to be. We like to dress it up and be like it's collaborative storytelling and it's imagination, and it is all those things. I'm not saying that it's not. At the end of the day, the game aspect of it is a resource management game. Hit points, hit dice, abilities that you can use multiple times today, spell slots, rations, ammunition. It's a resource management game. The amount of time that you need to finish an adventure, like the old well, you need to get back with the cure before the entire town people die from the affliction. It's about a resource management game. You have a limited amount of time, you have a limited amount of stuff to do the things that you need to do in the game. That's what the game aspect of the game is about. And so that is what random encounters are about. So if you're in a position where you're just moving like in between adventures from location A to location B, you don't need random encounters in that. You're not under any sort of threat. I'm not going to throw an encounter at you that's potentially going to kill you as a random roadside encounter. Why would we do that? That would be silly. So we don't do that. Have you gone over this content with the 2024 DMG? No, I have not yet. We're gonna look at that stuff very soon. Just as soon as we're done through here, pretty much. So we have that. We have random encounters, which again really should be under exploration. Because that's generally when they come up. But I want to show this off just because this is definitely does not say that, what I was talking about, as to why you use them. Random encounters are a way to deliver the unexpected. Some players and DMs view random encounters and adventure as time wasters, which is what we talked about. Yet well-designed random encounters can serve a variety of useful purposes. They create urgency. That's pretty much the only one. It is to, at the end of the day, you're going to drain resources and create urgency. They establish atmosphere. Not really. They provide assistance. That's assuming that your random encounter is not a combat encounter. Is not wandering monster, which you also should definitely do. Random encounters don't always have to be combating. They should definitely be opportunities to find like NPCs and potential allies or wandering merchants and stuff like that. People who can give you information, who can trade with you, who might give you a side quest or might join up with you because you're both doing the same thing, so they can be helpful. They can fill in maybe a role in the party that the party isn't good at. Like if you don't have anybody who has wilderness survival and you know this is a wilderness adventure where they might need to track something, it would be helpful if you gave them an NPC who's kind of okay at tracking. Doesn't have to be the best in the world, but just means that they can continue the adventure. They add interest to the world. Not really. Again, if you're doing stuff outside of combat encounters, yes. They reinforce campaign themes. Kind of. If you were doing something that was like in a war-torn area, sure. Or like a zombie apocalypse and you wanted to have a bunch of zombie random encounters, that would make sense. And a lot of them, that doesn't necessarily play out, in my experience. Triggering random encounters. The players are getting off track and slowing down the game. Yeah, it can be used as a stick sometimes. So, ideally, probably not would you do that. The only time that I use it when the players are getting off track or slowing down the game is if they're in a dungeon. And like, if you guys just hang around in the dungeon, it's likely that wandering monsters will come around. Characters stop for a short or long rest. Again, unless they're doing it in a dungeon, I'm probably not going to do that roll. I usually give them one roll like overnight. That's about it. Unless they're really in a dangerous territory and I'm really trying to ratchet up that tension or create that urgency. But generally, it's not fun. What happens if you have a random encounter in the middle of the night, in the middle of people taking a long rest, is that everybody gets up, they fight the encounter, and then what do? They just go back to sleep. At the end of that long rest, they get all their resources back anyways. So that doesn't do anything in the game. It doesn't do anything except waste time at the table. Characters are undertaking a long, uneventful journey. No, that's when we don't use them. when we don't use them. They draw attention to themselves when they should be keeping a low profile. Yeah, if they're trying to sneak by and they're doing dumb stuff, that's where it's actually... but that's a fail state of something else that's happening. That's not necessarily a random encounter. And then they're like, you should check for a random encounter every hour, every 4 to 8 hours during the day and during a long rest, whatever makes the most sense based on how active the area is. Okay. And it's wild, like, how much information there is about random encounters. You're looking at, what, that's like 3 pages about random encounters. Or 2.5 pages of random encounters. And then they give you 1 block for a Sylvan Forest encounter, assuming you're in a magical forest. Adventure environments. This is maybe about like dungeons and making dungeons. Which I would just throw everything under dungeon at that point. Dungeons and wilderness. So I'd go dungeons. And that'll be random dungeons and creating those things. And then right at the end, you have like a little section on like, oh, traps. I guess that should be something. I don't think even hazards gets its own thing in here. I'm saying. Nope. Which is very interesting. So not even a talk about hazards. Traps can be found almost anywhere. Mechanical traps, magic traps, how to trigger them, disabling them. We have a lot of stuff that's in here about how to deal with them, which is a lot of words to say. Traps are generally found either by a random perception check by just noticing it, or by doing an investigation check to accurately find it, or determining once you see it how to find the point where you can disable it, then making a check to disable it. Which, if it's a magic trap, you roll Arcana, and if it's a mechanical trap, you're usually rolling tools. It's a lot of words to say that. Again, we have these trap DCs and attack bonuses and severity by level. You'll notice this damage severity by level is the exact same as the improvised damage per level. It's exactly the same. It's the same table. So you can just use the same table. And then we have a little thing about complex traps, which arguably should be where we're spending most of the bulk of these words, but instead is like 2 little paragraphs. Turns the process of dealing with a trap into something more like a combat encounter, but then doesn't really give us a good example of. I think it does give us an example, but doesn't really talk a lot about how to make one. But I think they might have a complex trap in here. Maybe not. Nope. No, these are all pretty straightforward. I guess probably the collapsing. No, not collapsing. Falling net. Yeah, none of these are really particularly complex traps. They're all really your bog standard stuff. You're gonna expect. Now, the last thing that I want to look down in here is between adventures. I think it might be the area where we have any downtime information. There we go. Downtime activities. Obviously, this changes a lot. There's Xanathar's guide. There's also some stuff in the player's handbook about this. Downtime is sort of the last thing we had in there. And we're also shoehorning madness there. So madness is kind of covered by all aspects. Campaign tracking, running expenses. So we talked a little bit about like bastions, like property maintenance. Businesses, garrisons, that kind of sort of stuff, downtime activities. Which includes building a stronghold. Build the stronghold. Carousing. Crafting a magic item, but I'm just going to say crafting items because there's no reason you can't craft a mundane item using the same rules. Even though these rules are not good, that's why they redid them in Xanathar's guide. And I don't even use those rules. The ones I use are closer to Xanathar's guide. If you want to know the rules, they're very simple. It's the price of whatever the item is that you want. Let's say you were making a rare item in this circumstance, so let's not use rare item. Let's use an uncommon item. Worth about 500 gold. So you need 250 of that gold in hard materials. You need a place to work with it and the tools to work with it, and then you just need the time to do it. So the time to do it, the way that I run it, is that you need to make a sum of 250 in ability checks, and you get to do one of those ability checks per day that you work. And you have all that stuff. So you need the supplies with you. So it's something that it's likely that unless you have like a month of downtime where you're making active skill checks or tool checks during that time every day, that you'll probably be working on in between multiple adventures. There are instances where, like, one of the things that I've done with elves, because elves don't have to sleep, so they have an extra 4 hours a day that nobody else is using, is that I allow them to do crafting checks if they want to craft stuff, and assuming they're in an area where they can do it. So if they want to, they're like whittling or doing wood carving or something like that, something they could easily be doing while also on adventure camping, that they can make that crafting check at disadvantage if they want to, which represents them hurrying trying to do it in 4 hours. So it will take them more days, but it's something they can work on more often than other characters can. Gaining renown. Getting some reputation, running a business, sacred rights. Running a business. Fussiness. The one that I feel like I don't often use, but is really cool, that I wish I used probably more and probably should. I like it, but I feel like my players find it to be too much of a big pain in the ass, would be the selling magic items rule. I abrogate most of that being like, well, because I use the buying power for settlements, which is the population, 10% of it is equal to how much they can buy or sell an item of that gold amount. So if there were 500 people living in this village, you can buy things and sell things that are up to 50 gold price. Means you need to go to a place that's got at least 500 people in it if you want to buy like a standard healing potion. So any little old hamlet, you're not going to be able to find it. Give them a reason why they need to travel to different places, especially like larger settlements. And that includes things like selling magic items. Now, if you wanted to do something like sell an uncommon magic item that's worth 500 GP, remember that the selling price is actually much lower than that. The selling price is actually a tenth of it, if you go by the book. So you need to sell something. If you want to, you can sell an uncommon item because the only money that you will get for that is 50 gold. You could also sell it in a place that's got 500 people in it. Now, if you want more money than that, you're probably going to have to go to a larger place. Because that's like on-hand money that they have for someone to actually be able to buy it. Got other stuff that's down here. Other stuff that I feel like does not come up in most campaigns. Sowing rumors. Training in general. And I think that's most of the stuff. Yeah. Excellent. Alright, so that's everything from this DMG. We could go through the basic rules, but the basic rules are going to be very, very similar. Like I said, we're mainly focusing on what's here from a dungeon master aspect. So let's look over here at we have a bunch of stuff that's in the combat. Getting more stuff in the exploration side. But we're also throwing in things like dungeon traps, wilderness areas, which are a little loosey-goosey as far as them being rules about exploration, because combat also happens inside of them. So I don't know. I waffle back and forth on whether those should be even included at this point. But we can see the social side, not a lot going on. In fact, we've got more stuff in the downtime. We'll do this like, I should probably just put active. I do very much feel like downtime is that fourth pillar of D&D, and I want to be able to use it more. Issue I find is that you really have to do the heavy lifting as a dungeon master to focus on that. You really have to really pump the brake on a campaign. Be like, and you guys have downtime between adventures, which is a little bit hard to do. I think what I should do probably is run a more plot-centric adventure for a campaign, have a period of downtime, have like a session of downtime where people can work on stuff, but at that same time, as part of that session that I'm running, have people who maybe want to take care of side quests or personal quests that they can convince the rest of the party to go on them with. So provide a limited area, because I tried to run my current campaign at the start with being like fully character driven, being like, okay, you guys all have things that you want to involve yourselves with and check out, but what it ended up with is what I kind of talked about was that all my players just went in different directions. They weren't really working together. They weren't doing any of that stuff, and they fell into very much the modern D&D player trap, where it's like, unless a DM is actively presenting me with an adventure, I just don't do anything. I had to sort of we had multiple discussions about it, and in the end I took narrative control back over that. So now I was like, all right, well then I'm going to search forward and we're going to do a different type of campaign. But by doing that, now all your guys' backstory stuff is very much supplementary in it. It has been pushed to the side because you guys pushed it to the side yourself. So it is unfortunate. It's not primarily the way that I like to run campaigns. I like the players to be very invested in the way that they drive a lot of action. And because I tend to run a little bit more of a sandbox kind of style of game, whereas like there's a bunch of stuff that's going on in the world. A lot of it's really important. It's really whichever things that grabs your guys' attention or focus there that you want to deal with, plus fix in your own things that you want as far as your backgrounds and things that are going on for personal plot threads. But if you are particularly a new D&D player who has never played in a game like that, what I found out is that it's really hard for you to understand what that looks like. Whereas if I play with people who are more veteran players, especially players from older editions, they're like, oh, I do my thing? Cool, I got it. I understand the assignment. And every time they're in town, they're asking people about stuff in their background. They're looking up leads. They're trying to get information any place they can and trying to convince the party to like, hey, if you help me work on my thing, then once we're done, I will help you work on your thing. A thing where you get a lot of intra-party conversations about, which is not the case with a lot of modern D&D groups, where the characters would maybe only come into it through, especially 5th edition, where they're not used to that. 5th edition very much puts the onus on providing an adventure and providing the game. 90% of that rests on the dungeon master's shoulders, and they wonder why the game has a dungeon master burnout problem and why people don't want to do that job. Because it's really difficult and it's a lot of work, and it's oftentimes a lot of thankless work. So what we're going to do is I'm going to look at the DM basics real quick. I don't think there's anything in here that we haven't gone over. Yeah, the only thing that's in here that we have was creating the combat encounters, which I've already done that. So what we'll do is we'll pull up I'll pull up the 2024 one and we'll take a look at that really quickly. This is, of course, as usual, taking me way longer. I always have tons of stuff to say about this stuff. Early one to ram through like 20 years of D&D. Of course, what a fool to think that I would be able to do that. Foolish on my part. We'll go over some of this. Now, the only problem with this document is that I not have handy dandy bookmarks for it. And that sucks. I'll have to do that. But before I do that, I am going to take a break. I am going to take a little bio break. I can get some more coffee. We'll jump back in. We'll take a look at this. Like I said, most of this is going to be very, very similar to the 5th edition. The 5.5 2024 stuff is. But there are some slight changes in there. So we'll take a look at some of those stuff and see stuff that's been added, stuff that's been removed. We'll take a look from there. And then we'll see how long it takes. I might look at some of the 4th edition stuff if we have time. If not, we'll just have to hold off on that and we'll come back and look at it later. But I'm going to go take my break. So you guys hold on. I'll be back in a second. All right. Back. So we are going to jump over and we're going to look at the 5.5 stuff real quick. Pull it up. Yes. 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 All right. PM do and ensuring fun for all, mutual respect, blah, 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 blah. Respect my players. That'll never happen. Yes, stuck. Group size, ability checks, saving throws, difficulty classes, general running the game stuff, running social interactions. So this time, very interesting. So in the previous one, we started with exploration. This time we decided to start with running social interactions, which if you're looking at right here, you can tell that we believe this part of the game is worth exactly 1 page of content. Great. That's perfect. Love to see it. Running social interactions. All right, role playing. All of the same stuff that we looked at before. All specific characters. There's a couple of players doing most of the talking. Using other ability scores. Okay, so that's new. I like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down here to our lovely, lovely little social interaction thing. And we're going to add a nice little thing for 5.5. I'm just making a note on the document. All right, so the first thing that we have shows up here that's specifically different is ability scores. NPC won't talk to the characters unless one of them agrees to an arm wrestling match. Okay. So there are very so it's like there's very specific situations in which you could try to put this stuff in. But you know, not always going to make sense. But this would be like, oh, we're adventurers coming in and you're trying to convince the quest giver that you're able to handle the situation. They might be like, I need you to do a one-on-one with my major domo to see if you can score a hit on them and land a blow on them in a one-on-one combat, then I will assume then that you have the skills needed to take care of this adventure. You will have proven yourselves. So you can do stuff like that. I like that. That's good advice. It's a weird way. Or an NPC's speech is so full of obscure references to a particular area of knowledge that the characters can't use the information they receive until they interpret those obscure facts. Or the NPC refuses to give a direct answer, speaking only in vague hints the characters must piece together to get the information they seek. You want to use intelligence. I like that. Sort of a secondary way to pull that in. Wisdom. NPC is hiding something. All right. Yeah. Make insight checks. Got it. Dexterity. An NPC is hostile towards intruders. So the characters must talk from hiding. Social interaction provides a distraction that allows the character to get close enough to the NPC to steal something from the NPC's pocket. All right. Well, that arguably maybe not a social interaction then if what you're trying to do is steal something. What a very specific situation. It seems wildly even more specific than the strength example. All right, we've got the attitudes. None of that is different. Ability checks using the help action. So what they've done is they took that thing that I talked about that they had changed, they didn't do anymore, where they were like, oh, whoever provides a lot of input into the conversation and make a check, and if they succeed, you get, or if they did a good job, then you get, the person might get advantage on the roll at the end, or they might get disadvantage if they really flub something up. Instead, they were like, nope, that's not good. What you can do is give the help action, which will always be positive. And that's it. That's all we get about social interactions. That's it. So, actually, I believe is fully less information than the previous one. At least in the 2014 guide, they had tried with that guideline to be like, oh, here's a starting attitude and conversation check-ins. This one, they've kind of broken it down to be like, oh, they start with that. They can shift attitudes in the middle by doing stuff. It's even loosier and even goosier. And they're like, a brief conversation might be a single charisma check. A more complex encounter might involve multiple ability checks. Also dubious advice. One thing that you should know if you want to be a dungeon master or game master is that when you run a binary system where you either have a success or a failure, the way that most of those things do if you want to do complex checks is that there are always consequences when you have one failure. And so if you have something where it's like, well, they need to, this is a complex social interaction, so they might need to make like 3 or 4 different checks over the course of it, depending on what they're asking. If they fail even one of those checks, and that means that they fail the encounter, that's not good, because it means that the more checks there are, the more likely it is that they fail. So the way that you absolve yourself from this is you use something like the skill challenge system from 4th edition, where it's like you need to make 3 successes before 1 failure, or 5 successes before 3 failures. Basically, it's a best of 3 or best of 5 kind of thing. So I guess that would be 3 successes before 2 failures, right? Yeah. Same situation. Which kind of gives you some more leeway, so just failing once generally isn't an issue. Because, hey, when you're rolling a d20, all the numbers on that die are equally weighted. You're just as likely to roll a 17 as an 18, as a natural 20, as a natural 1. So when you have a totally flat curve about what you're rolling, the more rolls you have, the more likely it is that you will actually roll. Whereas if you had something like a 2d6 curve, which has a little bit more of a bell curve, you're more likely to roll like 7 most of the time, which is going to be pretty among average. That's why you see it's used by things like anything powered by the apocalypse, Dungeon World, stuff like that. And some of the things that we're going to be looking at when we look at some more of the free RPG Day stuff. One of them is Root. Root is very powered by the apocalypse. Very adjacent. I don't think it's actually PBTA, but if not, it's very, very close. It also does a lot of cool stuff in it, so I'm really excited to talk to you guys about that. I finished making my notes about it, but I'm going to look at some other stuff first because I got them right in front of me. So the next time we do one of those, we're going to look at Wizard Riders, and we're going to look at this little guy. This is the Lore Masters deck, which, like the homebrew one, I have the previous version of. We can look at both of those, and I can talk about what I like about the new offerings versus the old offerings, things that got better, things that got worse. Too much off topic. All right, exploration. Maps, got them. This one tells us to use settlement maps. Interesting. See, they made the difference. I talked about, it's not really about pace and stuff, it's about tracking time. The importance is about tracking time. Let's go up to our exploration because that was it. That was all we got for the social encounter stuff. So, you know, not the greatest in a lot of ways. Certainly not better than the 2014 version. which is already not a particularly high bar. So I know I've talked about a lot of my feelings about the 2024 DMG, where it is better in a lot of ways, but also a lot of the advice in it seems to be even more vibes based than actual tangible advice than the 2014 version. So it's all like good information, but it's also like people telling you like you should do good things. Great. How do I do the good things? You'll figure it out. It does have a lot of that, I feel like. We have tracking time. Actions and exploration. It relates to just a few actions: search, study, and utilize. Search. UD. Utilize. It is a very interesting thing that happens in 2024 is they're really trying to like codify actions. I don't really know exactly what the design intent is there, because exploration stuff that's happening out of combat generally also still isn't being tracked in things like initiative turns. So usually we don't need to be as granular as in these 6 seconds. What are the exact 2 to 3 things that you are doing? Are you moving? Are you doing some sort of object interaction? Are you using a utilize or search action in this specific area? Yeah, it says even here, it's seldom necessary to rely on the action rules during exploration. Except to remember that the character can only do one thing at a time. That can slow the game down. One of the things that I like about some of the other systems that I've played and run recently is primarily the one that sticks out to me that I ran recently was ICRPG, behind my fat head on that shelf. And that you are always in initiative in Index Card RPG. You are always in initiative no matter what you are doing. And I was like, oh, that's weird. Not sure if I'm going to like that. And then I was running it and I was like, the thing that it does really, really well when you do that is it assures that everybody's doing something in exploration outside of combat, that everybody has a moment to be like, oh, it's my turn. I make sure that every single player and their character gets specific focuses in every aspect of the game. If they are talking to an NPC, all right, what are you saying? Get like, 6 seconds, something, so you can say a few phrases or something like that. They'll have a response to you. What are you saying to them? Blah, blah, blah. And on that turn, they can always be like, I pass. But they're always given the opportunity. There's always space made for the player to be able to act in those areas. And it was really great running exploration scenes where it's like, okay, on this turn, you were like, I'm going to go search the desk. What are you doing? Okay, I'm going to go look out to make sure that no enemies come up on us while we're looting the room. Great, what are you doing? I'm going to look through the computer logs and in the ship's computer to see if there's any information in it. Perfect. What are you doing? And it was nice to be like, oh, everybody is doing something. It's something I've noticed more just recently. I was just playing on Sunday in a game where we're in the middle of a long dungeon dive. We're towards the end of it, thankfully. And in that, our DM's like, okay, did the recap and was like, what do you guys do? And there's like this beat where we're sitting there, the group, and I'm like, all right, well, I know that I'm listening to the description. I'm like, all right, I know there's a door for us to check out, just to see if any of the players are wanting to say anything or do anything. There's that beat. There's kind of like that pregnant pause where nobody says anything. And I'm like, all right, well, I gotta go check the door for traps and to see if it's locked. And the unfortunate thing is like then my other players that I'm playing with kind of take a back seat because they weren't doing anything. And so now it's just like me and the Dungeon Master playing kind of a little one-on-one game when it's like, all right, I check the door, I open the door, I look what's behind the door. Do I see any traps in the hallway? I'm going to go ahead and start moving forward, keeping an eye out for traps and making sure I'm doing that smart adventurer things, like check the ceiling to make sure there's nothing on the ceiling, because adventurers don't look up. There's always stuff on the ceiling. And I don't want a spider or something worse to drop on me. But while I'm doing that, that means that the other players at the table also aren't doing anything. And so I like that always an initiative aspect of it, and it's something I want to start incorporating more in D&D. I think one of the things that I've been tooling around with that I want to do is I want to start the session by having everybody roll initiative. And just have that initiative, and then when we get into combat, whenever combat kicks off, it goes on that person. If it's like the third person in initiative, we have 4 people in the group. If it's that third person in initiative, who's the person who opens the door with the monsters in it, it's still their turn. The monsters are going to slot in at their initiative spot, which I take 10 on the initiative, so they're going to be probably towards the middle here. That means that this person's going to go, this person, this person, this person. So everybody's going to have a chance to go before the monsters. But if it was, say, this person who opened the door, then immediately the monsters are going to go after them. Just to make things a little bit more fluid and keep moving. And then after the encounter's over, we roll a new initiative. So that's one of the things that I'm toying with. I'm not sure that I want to add it to the campaign, long-term campaign that I'm running. So it might be something where I'm looking kind of for an opportunity to maybe run a one-shot for either one of my groups. Then I'm going to drop it in and play it. Be like, I want to try to do something slightly different with initiative, just to see how it works. Because I think it might make things a little bit more fluid. And really make things fluid between when you're passing between exploration, combat, to social, back and forth through these different areas. Game. Ability checks. Yes. Perception. When to call for a check. Okay. I do want to put this down because we didn't get a lot of this kind of information. When to call for a check. So technically, 100%. Important time to call for a wisdom perception check is when another creature is taking the hide action. Okay. Using passive perception using the investigation skill. Applies to a situation where a character is using reason and deduction to arrive at a conclusion about something under examination. Investigation applies when characters are trying to figure out how a thing works, how to open a trick door, how to get into a secret compartment, and so on. Don't use investigation skill to determine if a character notices something. That's the purview of perception. This is such a 5e problem about when do you use perception, when do you use investigation. And again, it's still kind of unclear, but it also makes like rogues real weird where they get real mad where it's like, okay, so now I have to have dexterity and wisdom and intelligence to be good at my job. Great. Or you're like, well, I noticed something, but I'm too dumb to figure out how it works. So I need to call the wizard over to take a look at it. Which is really unfortunate because 5e is very much, intelligence is very much the dump stat. Because it's just not that important in this edition. So there's a lot of situations where you could end up with characters like, I don't know. Not maybe the greatest gameplay in the world. So I put down when to call for a perception check, but I'm going to remove that because I think that the more important thing here is perception versus investigation. I think that's actually the more salient point here. And again, not super well designed. I guess if I wanted to say it is that perception is the what you see, and the investigation is more like figuring out the how aspect of it, like how it works, or the insight as to like what does this mean. Anything that right, it's anything that you're drawing a conclusion from, really. So like other editions of the game don't have investigation in it. That's important to note. So the inclusion of investigation is a bit weird, and it's understandable how after 10 years people are still like, I'm not really sure when to call for which one. It's understandable. Hidden things, perception and encounters, audible, underwater encounter distance. The weird thing is you haven't even given us regular encounter distance. Why are you giving us underwater encounter distance? Why is it any different? You don't think you can see further than 60 feet in clear water under bright light? I don't think that's true. I think you can see further than that. Clear water and dim light. Maybe. But we do get a section on travel, which was not really something we got before. Let's add travel. So we get this journey stages, journeys without destinations. That's weird. Sometimes characters travel without a clear path to follow or a clear destination in mind. In such a case, use the grid of your map, squares, or hexes to define the stages of the journey. However many miles each square or hex might be, this style of play is sometimes called a hex crawl. In this kind of wilderness exploration, you can take one of two approaches: sandbox approach or random approach. Yeah. Sandbox approach is basically, do you want to do a lot of prep work up front? Or the random approach is like, do you want to improv a bunch? Do you want to do a bunch of prep or do you want to improv a bunch? Those are your two choices. But I do find it interesting. I'm just adding a note for myself. And I guess this is really under exploration in general. But there's basically little distinction between overland travel and wilderness exploration. In my mind, and I think specifically in older editions of D&D, or even things like contemporary game systems, those are generally not treated as the same thing. Because one of those is a mode of play, and the other one's just getting from position A to B. That's why I'm like, you can't really have a journey as far as travel without a destination in mind. You need that destination in mind, or else how will you know when you've gotten there? How do you know you've reached your destination? So like, you need planning stages. You can use the accompanying travel planner sheet to plan the stages of a journey. Use multiple copies of the travel planner for a journey with more than 3 stages. For each stage, note where it starts and ends, the distance covered, and predominant terrain. A journey might only have a single stage of the trip as a matter of following a clear path to a well-known destination. Journey consisting of 3 stages makes for a satisfying track. Again, so it's real loosey-goosey about, like, where does a stage begin or end? Another example, a character might travel along a river to a forest edge, that's stage 1, follow the trail into the heart of the woods, stage 2, and then search the woods for an ancient ruin, stage 3. Okay. So if I was doing hex crawling, I could see all of that being part of a hex crawl. I could also see traveling to the forest edge just being a overland travel aspect. You're following a well-known landmark. Presumably, if you're following a river, there's probably a road. Not always, but there's probably a road at that point. And then after that, you're following a trail, which you might consider part of a journey. You might consider hex crawling. I would probably consider it part of a journey unless it was a game trail. But then it's really not until you get into the area where you're doing the active searching, and that would be the things that where you're really crawling hex by hex, trying to find things in the area. That's what I consider hex crawling. If you're off the trail looking for very specific areas, if you're following landmarks, that's generally overland travel and following like well-worn paths. So then they have this this travel planner, this real kind of Canva looking, very contemporary, what I would call very contemporary D&D supplement design, like third-party stuff you would find on like Etsy and stuff like that. No shade, that's not a bad thing. It's just, it is very much looks to be a thing about when this came out and appeals to a very specific type of dungeon master. Whereas I look at this and I feel like I could put way more information on a small page than this. But I'm also more utility focused. And I would never make like the stages. So it seems like the stage is primarily broken up by like whatever the biome is, or kind of where you're at. That seems to primarily be the way that they're kind of splitting this up. But they do give us some actual running stages, running advice. So in that we get pace, narrate the travel, which includes challenges, track rations and water. Generally, I don't track water. I know I said that it's very, I find it very important and very important part of the game to track resources. Water in most biomes is relatively easy to find, especially since we're not worried about like potability of the water. Like, but in a lot of places you're able to dig and hit the water table, or you're able to find surface water that's running by. Generally finding water, especially if you're following things like game trails, not too difficult to find. It's only when you get into areas like deserts where it's actually important, and otherwise I just consider it part of rations. Then you're going to track those things and you're going to track progress. It's very funny kind of looking at overland travel and looking at stuff like that after playing Ironsworn, because Ironsworn has a very interesting undertake a journey mechanic, which I do not by any means think it's perfect. In fact, I find it often quite annoying when I'm playing Ironsworn, especially as a solo game, because undertaking a journey will kick your butt a lot, because it will absolutely annihilate your resources. Then you're like, now I gotta stop and look for stuff. And when I stop and look for stuff, there's a likelihood that I'm gonna find something else, or it's going to take something else away from me. So it's kind of can sometimes feel like a death spiral of 1,000 little cuts. So it also has some issues about like how long to make journeys, as far as how many successes you need. But it is interesting because the pace is not really important. Like how long it takes is not an important concern in that game. And after playing it and doing undertake journeys many times, trying to go from one place to another, because not every travel includes undertake a journey. It's only when it's like an important or sizable journey, especially over sort of like rough land. But doing that and going through that aspect, you often realize it's like, oh, right, like even the amount of time that's going by doesn't really matter, because that system doesn't track that sort of thing. You can have a totally fulfilling tabletop RPG experience where time actually isn't a factor, even though D&D very much tries to tell you throughout its editions that time is a very important factor, and I don't disagree with that. But in that game, it's like, oh, well, you're often just traveling, and whenever you get there is whenever you get there. It's more about the things that are in your way to getting there, and the condition in which you arrive when you get to your destination. Which is, again, about, like, resource management. It's also very much a resource management game. And it wears it on its sleeve very well. And it uses that resource management aspect to inform the narrative of the game very well. Okay, weather. We talk about weather. Weather has no significant game effect most of the time. Great. Good that we're including it then. Even this is something that D&D will do that bugs me sometimes. They're like, oh, by the way, this is light rain or light snowfall, so light precipitation or heavy precipitation. It doesn't actually, like, if I want to know what that means in game mechanics terms, I have to go look at a different place, which, by the way, both of those count. Light precipitation counts as light obscurement, and strong precipitation or heavy precipitation, I don't know why they did light and strong versus light versus heavy. Heavy precipitation counts as heavy obscurement. In the same way that, I don't know, wind's not on here for some reason. Why isn't wind on here? Wind, suitably strong enough wind counts as cover against ranged attacks. But you have to know that stuff, or know that you need to go look it up somewhere else, because we are not going to tell you that here for some reason. So these are some of these, like, vestigial things that I think are real, like, holdovers from old D&D editions, where you see, like, oh, we have to keep including encounter distance, and not that encounter distance is fine. I wish we used encounter distance more. The problem is that we include it here, but that's not actually how the game is played most of the time in contemporary D&D. Like, what is the maximum pace? Who cares? You're probably traveling at normal pace most of the time. If you need to go faster, you will go faster. Generally never going to be traveling slow unless you have to be traveling slow. So it's kind of a non-issue. What's the average on this? Like, these encounter distances are all over the place. Oh, interesting that a mountain has the longest, one of the longest encounter distances. Yeah, being on a mountain, you really don't have good visibility about things that can attack you most of the time. You have a pretty limited visibility, unless they're in the air. So a lot of them at the minimum is like 70 feet on average, which is funny because most encounters start certainly within 60 feet most of the time. They get pretty far out, so 66 is what? 21, so 210 feet on average. That's pretty far. Interesting. So they give us a lot of this stuff. A lot of this is the same stuff that we've been looking at. The weather is a new one. Right, we did not have any weather stuff in here. Very funny. We'll add weather. Travel pace, all this stuff was in there. Forging DCs, that's nice. Like, this is a nice table. If you remember to use it, it's a great table. The truth is like, this would be something that I would look at putting... Sorry, it's in my bag. That I would look at putting in my... I have the other one near me. In my Dungeon Master binder as like a quick reference. Or put it like on a screen, like a Dungeon Master screen. But the truth is like, I won't find this stuff very important. I generally start mine... If you're on the trail and you see... and you're in the open, I'm like, yeah, you guys see that there are riders like 200 yards over that way. Do you want to do anything about that or not? We'll watch them and see if they turn our way. Okay. Then I'll probably make a check for their... Again, some of this stuff needs to be consolidated because this also doesn't have like their reaction table. Like, because now I'll need to make the 2d6 reaction roll. Like, if I roll high and be like, oh, maybe they do turn towards you, but they clearly aren't drawing any sort of weapons or speeding up as far as looks like it seems very clear they're not coming in to attack. Oh, well, okay, we meet them to talk to them. Or if I roll somewhere in the middle and be like, oh, they're disinterested, so maybe they're just ignoring you. Or as soon as you see them, you recognize that they see you, and you see them peel off and try to put distance in between you. Not flee, but just put a nice wide berth between. And that's a good way to add random encounters if you want without them kind of... You just put creatures there, and then depending on what the player characters do and maybe what your reaction roll is for the monsters, which are probably going to be humanoids, you just let the situation organically develop rather than be like, this will be a combat encounter or these people will be friendly. Like, I don't know. You see these people, do you even interact with them? Because it's perfectly reasonable to be like, actually, we're just kind of, we're gonna be like ships passing in the night. We acknowledge each other with a little, give them one of these and just keep moving. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. Or if you want to know information or you're looking for something because you're doing text scrolling, they might be able to give you information about the lay of the land, about stuff that's around, which could be extremely helpful. It was really more about like letting that develop organically. But also, these are really great, but if I don't have the reaction roll table with it, it means whenever this encounter is going to happen, I also need to look somewhere else for something. It also seems like most of the stuff that's on that table is not addressed here. Like, this is not the section where we're talking about foraging. Or even talking about navigation. Or why you would need the search DC. Narration during travel. Sure. Then we have our journey state. Journey challenges. Check resources. And mark progress. That's nice. It gives us a little bit of a framework. I mean, show the full screen down here. So it gives us a little bit of framework. So that is in a lot of ways a big improvement in 5.5. It gives us these challenges that we could do. It would be nice to have these as like a roll table or something that I could utilize as a dungeon master. I don't need them. I've got my own like wilderness roll tables, but I always assume that a new dungeon master is looking at this book for like the first time, and they are trying to learn how to run the game effectively by reading this book, because it's really the only resource that teaches you how to run the game as a dungeon master. Never assuming that, like in old school D&D, if you've ever tried to read like the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, give it a whirl. It's a real trip. You understand reading it why by reading the book you don't understand how to play the game. Like, it's a really, really good reference, but you have to know everything that's already going on anyway. And early D&D is very much you learn the game by sitting at the table with people who already know how to play the game, or already know how to play their specific version of the game. And so you have to, by osmosis, kind of learn it by experiencing it. And once you do that, then you can look at the book and be like, okay, now I have a better understanding of how to use this book. Because it's more like here's a reference manual for like how to look up stuff and how to add stuff to your game that's important for to help you run the game, but it's not going to teach you how to run the game. But more and more becomes incumbent upon D&D and other TTRPGs where it's the book is really about teaching a game master or a dungeon master how to run the game. And so that is the lens that I look at it through when you're trying to sell it to people who aren't already playing the game. Ambushes, attack from above, which is different than ambushes. And sightings, found by chance, pursuits. Okay, are you going to tell us how to run some of these? No. The answer is no. So you get a pursuit, which is a chase scene. And then they're like, well, they might be chased by something. Or they might chase something. Any reference to where I find the chase rules? Nope. How do I run this? Nope. The characters happen upon monsters that are camping, eating, hunting, basking in the sun, walking along the same trail, or engaged in some other activity. So that is just a random encounter. The characters and monsters spot each other from distance in open terrain. Not particularly any different than found by chance. Attack from above and ambush just assumes that you are being ambushed. One of those ambushers is flying. Other things you can do: foraging, navigation, obstacles, searches, and tracking. But unlike in 5th edition, this is the first time that we kind of come across foraging. An aspect of it. As well as navigation. They didn't really give us any reason to mess with that. They kind of always assumed you knew where you were going. Obstacles. An obstacle is terrain or weather that obstructs the character's path. Examples include a cliff, a blizzard, or a forest fire. To get past the obstacle, the characters might need to backtrack and find an alternate route. They might need to take shelter until the obstacle goes away. Let the player spend time thinking about the solution. Then be generous in adjudicating whether their plan works. I like that advice. Be generous. In addition to the chance of a delay, adding a few hours, day, or a couple of days to the current stage of the journey, here are some other consequences you can impose the characters fail or overcome. Delay is fine. Problem is that like it's not telling me the impact of the delay. What is the actual impact of the delay? Is it, oh, it's going to use more resources, as in like rations and water? Is the delay assuming that I'm on some sort of timed mission? Because if I'm on some sort of timed mission, it's unlikely that the group's going to like bed down for a blizzard or forest fire to go away. Maybe they'll try an alternative route, but you know, I feel like it's players, so 9 times out of 10 they're just going to try to barrel through it, which may or may not work, or may or may not be a good idea. It's probably not. But also sometimes an obstacle where it's just like, oh, we were trying to get from point A to point B, and there's a blizzard that's in the way, or a blizzard happens, and we bed down, and then the blizzard passes, and then we continue on our way. There's not really like any conflict there, if they're not in a rush to get there already. And especially if they come across something like a cliff, it'll be like, if you come across a cliff, assuming you're at the top of the cliff, everybody's just going to look at the wizard and be like, you have Featherfall? Because then we're just going to jump off this cliff. If not, then we'll have to find our way around, or we can try to climb down. But if you have Featherfall, we're just going to jump off this cliff and fall down. Even if it takes an hour for you to redo your spell slots, it's totally worth it, because it'll take less time. We can just jump down there. If you're at the bottom of the hill, same sort of situation. It's like, somebody got spider climb? Then we can just run up the cliffside. Looking for those like more clever ways of getting around it, rather than being like, can I just go around this thing? Or wait. Obviously you can't wait out of the cliff. Cliffs don't erode very quickly. You're going to be waiting here for a very long time if you're waiting for erosion to take care of the cliff. Characters encounter one or more hostile. These are things that happen if you decide to delay or go around. Combat, which was the same thing that we talked about with like wandering monsters. This is one of the things that can happen and be like, you're going to encounter potentially hostile creatures. For example, marching through a burning forest instead of circling around it might prompt an encounter with raging fire element. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Sure. I feel like the problem with that situation is that I feel like if I was a dungeon master and I was like, oh, and this was a random obstacle I threw in the middle of the journey and be like, oh, a forest fire is broken down. And it's like, if they decide to go through there, it's like, yeah, I'll throw like this fire elemental counter at them. They'll deal with, so they can get through it faster, but they have to deal with this encounter instead of going the long way around. And they went through and they had an encounter with fire elementals. They would think, oh, this must be some sort of fire elemental issue has caused the fire, and now we must find the source of the fire and be like, no, one-off thing. Don't think about this too much. This is not a weird side quest within a quest kind of thing. I feel like if you set stuff inside of players, especially modern players, they'll be like, oh, well, obviously this must be plot centric. Nope, sometimes it's just stuff. The characters just take damage. Okay. The improvising damage. Talked about that already. That's why you should keep that around. Exhaustion. Ooh, we get a little subsection here. Do players need to track rations? Let's see what they say. You might decide tracking is unnecessary in your game. You assume the characters proficient in survival can find enough food and water to sustain the party. Make sure you work that into the narration of your journey so the player feels good about choosing that skill or proficiency. No. Bad D&D. Bad DMG. Not how we do that. That's the same problem that we have with the 2014 Ranger. Don't be like, hey, you're good at the thing, so instead of doing the thing and being good at it, we just say, it happened. That's not fun as a player. It's not fun to be like, oh, I'm really good at being able to do survival checks. I'm so good at survival checks, I don't actually have to do survival checks. That's not fun. That's not fun, engaging stuff. If the answer to being good at a thing is not rolling the dice, then you fucked up something along the way. That shouldn't be the end result you get in playing the game. Is not playing the game is the end result. You fucked something up. I do not believe that is an appropriate way to deal with that. Great food and water spell, absolutely. Perfect use. Good berries. What is it? Like a bead of nourishment or a bead of refreshment, right? That's the water one. Getting an alchemy jug that gives you water. All great ways to get over that. Especially if you can give them, if they have a large enough party where alchemy jug like doesn't quite give enough water for everybody. So each of them are like not quite getting the full way. So that way making the check is still important, but it's not like if you don't make the check, we're all gonna die. But it's more like if you don't make the check, maybe somebody has to take a level of exhaustion. That's a better mechanic. So that person still feels like they're doing a really important job. But also if they fail, they don't all turn into bleached bones in the middle of the desert. Or start getting levels of exhaustion, which just becomes a death spiral in that case. So these are the new 5.5 exhaustion rules, which just means you get what? A -1 to your deaths? Definitely worth it. That definitely seems like the appropriate response. I'm very much on record being like, I don't really like the redo of the exhaustion rules and I don't use them. I like the old ones better. They get a condition. They do searches. Okay. Last stage of the journey. Oh, this is just when you're looking for stuff. Okay. Okay, so for the search table, is looking for like the point of interest or the location that you're looking. This stuff is good. I like this. This is significantly better. Having some sort of thing that having this travel stage thing, even though it's not perfect, I don't agree with a lot of its implementation. I appreciate that it is something. It is something tangible for Dungeon Masters to be able to grab and be like, here is a way that you can run this. Perfect. A very good step up from 5th edition and 5e base. Definitely enjoy it. Shifting weather, terrain obstacles. The trail crosses a river or similar obstacle that allows no tracks. It uses the search DC column. Okay. I like for the picture here. A river presents an obstacle to characters traveling through the wilderness. They chose like the shallowest absolute river they could. Things like 6 inches deep. You could just walk across it, guys. You'll be fine. Just hold each other's hands and walk across it. You're gonna be fine. This is obviously not a very large river, and certainly not deep. The halfling is up to their ankles in it. We're gonna be okay. And then we go into combat. That was nice. We got some stuff in there. I like that. Some good things in there. This very much a step up on the exploration side. Does it give it gave us at least some sort of framework as to how to do travel. Now, like I said, I feel very differently where I think that travel is very different than X crawling where you're looking for something, or whether that thing may just be basic adventure or not. Combat, initiatives, the open list versus the hidden list again. I don't know why we're still talking about that. Tracking monster hit points, same thing. And don't you guys know how to do math? Look, if you want it to be easier, just count up the hit points. That's the easy way to do it, rather than count down. Using and tracking conditions, miniatures, tacticals, maps, character size and space. This is all basically the same. This, however, we added. Cover, I don't believe is in the previous one. It certainly is not. So we can add that. That was an important thing that was not in there. We had line of sight, but we didn't have cover in there. Tracking position at long range. Devices range counters. Yeah. Yeah, I would add that in there. Tracking long range. Again, if you look at a lot of any of the published adventures, tracking at long range, just most fights happen within about 30 to 60 feet starting position. So it's like within a move and you can get there. This is a thing where it's like if you were running a true kind of like old school kind of thing where you're doing things like encounter distances and you might be starting an encounter like 1,000 feet away when you guys can see each other and you know you can recognize who they are because you have like like a spyglass or something, and you know that, oh, those are bad guys, so we're gonna start charging towards them or whatever. But most of the time you're generally starting within a move, maybe a dash most of the time. Especially because most combat tends to happen in an indoor area, not actually an outdoor area. Narration of combat, fine. Lots of hit points. Abilities, actions in combat. I believe all this stuff has. We have thing for actions in combat. Yeah, combat action. A lot of this is very much the same. The things that are different. Heroic inspiration, which is something that we didn't have before. We didn't talk about inspiration at all. And this is talking about counterspell. But really, it's about counterspell, but they put it under the heading monsters casting spells. But that's about counterspell. Now we're just gonna put down adjudicating counterspell. I feel very, very blessed that I don't have to deal with counterspell very often because I don't think it's a particularly fun mechanic. The way that it is used in 5th edition, where it's like, oh, you can cast a spell, it can be counterspelled, and then on your turn you can use a reaction to counterspell the counterspell, even though you're not actually supposed to be able to use reactions on your turn. I think it's a very silly. It wastes a lot of time to be like to figure out does a spell hit or not. I do not like it. I do not think it is good, particularly good design. If it was just the one counterspell, I'd be fine with it, but counterspelling counterspell is not a thing. Or having multiple people trying to counterspell the same thing is... I mean, I like of just blowing through spell slots. I like when players are blowing through spell slots. Good for me as a DM. Yes, use all your little spells. But it really does slow down stuff for like one action. Using a bunch of stuff to figure out to resolve one action stack. Keep combat moving. Don't repeat game states. So a lot of this, we're not talking about the reason why all this stuff's in here. But a lot of this, when we're getting down here, when we're talking about get down here, about keeping combat moving, this is about speeding up combat. Like how to speed up. well, I'll go ahead and be like keep combat moving. Because the loudest refrain about issues that people have with D&D combat in general, it's not most of the mechanics. Everybody's pretty good with the mechanics. 5e and 5.5 like some of the mechanics, dislike some of the mechanics. The way that I described, I think 5th edition when it first came out is like, oh, this is kind of like everybody's second favorite edition of D&D. If you played a different edition, you probably maybe like the other edition better, depending on which edition you played. But everybody's generally okay being like, yeah, I'd play 5th edition. But the general refrain across any contemporary amount of D&D over the past 20 years has been like, actually longer than 20 years, almost 30 years at this point, is that, man, combat's real slow. Be real slow. I like it, but it's really slow. And so what I don't like is that they're talking about speeding it up. So they're like, oh, well, obviously it's the dungeon master's fault that the combat's slow. Yeah, and it's not the bloated hit points and letting people counterspell counterspells. That's not the issue. Doing stuff like that. Making sure that everybody has reactions and can use all that stuff. And people are asking questions about stuff all the time and slowing combat down and doing those sorts of things. It's obviously about your narration of it. Unfortunately. Hastening monster's demise. If combat has gone on long enough, the character's victory is almost certain. Not certain, almost certain. Very interesting. You can simply have the monster drop dead. The players don't ever need to know that it still had 15 hit points left. Characters left. Back. Yeah. I mean, it's better if you don't just like scratch hit points, if you just have them in hostilities, which is the next section, which is what I would probably nice to do. Most monsters can see when a fight's not going their way or not going anywhere at all. A sapient monster might parlay with the characters. Yeah. Get out of combat. Start using morale. So one of the things that I do with combat is that most monsters will start making morale checks on their turn once 50% of the group is gone. So if you have 8 goblins and 4 of the goblins are dead, they all start making morale checks, which is a charisma roll under. That's how I do it. So I think goblins have like either an 8, 9, or 10 charisma. So I roll a d20. If they roll whatever their charisma score or lower, they stay in the fight. If they roll higher than that, then they flee. It's a little bit easier than coming up with the DC. You could just use a DC if you wanted to, but I like using it based off of the character stats or off of the monster stats because I already have them in front of me instead of having to try to think up a DC on the fly. Also, start rolling for it if they have personally taken 15% of their HP damage or not. So if they had, I can't remember what goblins have off the top of my head, like 11 hit points or something. If they've taken 5 hit points of damage, I'd probably do 6. If they've taken 6 points of hit points of damage, they also need to make the morale check, even if they are the only one that's been hurt. Now, not every creature does that. Zealots and unthinking creatures don't do that. So constructs, undead, those things fight until they're down to 0 hit points. So if that's the case, you do this first part where you just hasten a monster's demise, where it's just like, once you get into like round 3 or 4 of combat anyways, it's pretty clear the PCs are generally going to win. And so you can just be like, oh man, whoever gets the next good hit, they'll go down. Because it's nice to give them a nice good hit to end on. And so it's not like, oh, I dealt like 2 points of damage. Be like, oh, that killed him. Instead of it being like, oh yeah, I rolled really well on my damage and I did a whole bunch of damage. Yeah, let that one be the thing that finishes off. Otherwise, zealots are people who are like here, like really devout cultists and things like that, where death is no longer a fear for them. Not because they can't perceive death like a construct or undead can't, but because they're like, that is, maybe they're going to enter the bosom of whatever eldritch creature they are worshiping. And so death is no longer an obstacle for them. They're not afraid of it. So they will fight till they are dead in service of that creature or pet or cause or whatever it is. But otherwise, if they don't make the morale check, they either run or they surrender, or they try to find some leverage in which they can do some sort of parlay. I've had monsters like grab PCs, especially if there's a downed PC, grab a downed PC and put like a dagger to the throat and be like, oh, we're gonna stop combat here. If you keep fighting, I'm gonna kill this piece. And generally, if that happens, I let the players know, it's like, look, this is a thing where we exit a little bit of the mechanics. It's not like this goblin stabs them and then they automatically fail 2 death saving throws. Like, no, this goblin is going to cut the PC's throat. They will bleed out. And you will not have an opportunity to do something about this. So you need to decide right now, if you have something like command or some way to stun them, you can do that right now. But if you screw up, the stakes are really high. You better have some way to bring back your friend from being dead. And also, combat's going to continue. We're going to go right back into initiative if that happens. Adding combatants. But yeah, I want to add that stuff in here. So, how to win combat. Add a combatant. Add excitement to a battle. Consider adding a combatant. I would say this is questionable advice. You need to apply a lot of salt when you're doing something like that. It really sucks if you're a player and you just get really lucky or whatever, or something goes off just the right way, or you have just the right spell for just the right situation, and the DM's like, nuh-uh, there's more stuff. Like, that's not fun. That's kind of trying to take a win away. For that, I have 2 really good examples of 2 different DMs that I played with who did 2 very different things when that happened. And it's about having a player character that has the right spell at the right time. One of them is Divine Soul Sorcerer. The other one is a Cleric. So let's do the bad example first. So we're doing this thing where we're traveling around. We come across this ogre. This ogre's really angry at us. Is not letting us pass in the direction we want to go. The specifics of what's going on is not. And, they're getting agitated with it. I think we may have failed a persuasion check. I can't remember the specifics at this point. And I'm like, cool, I'm playing a Cleric. I cast, and this was Pathfinder 2, I think. Pathfinder 2e. I cast Calm Emotions on him. Boom, did it. Yeah, it was 2E because they failed quite badly, and they were, I think, with that Calm Emotion, they're actually afeared of you. If I remember correctly, it's been a while. Like, so they were like, well, they're not going to take a positive action here, and obviously, my DM was like, well, I really hate that a combat encounter got pushed to the side because of one spell. It was like, so a second ogre comes up the path. I'm like, cool. I cast Calm Emotions again on the second ogre. At this point, he gave up, but I was like, we had a good laugh around the table, but it was very much like, why are you trying to take away? I just happen to be stalking Calm Emotions because I didn't know what we were coming up against, and it's a nice way to deal with combat sometimes for somebody you might not necessarily want to kill. So doing that, but having a DM who's like, oh, I hate that one spell completely abrogated this entire combat encounter that I had planned. Now, I will jump to another DM's example that I played with, slightly more recently, definitely playing 5e. Playing that Divine Soul Sorcerer. Hey, guess what? Big boss battle's coming up. It's an Aboleth. Guess what I picked up at my last level up as a Divine Soul Sorcerer? Banishment, because I can choose things off the cleric list. And I'm like, well, Banishment is just a good spell when you're just like, just to nope out of an encounter with a lot of high power stuff. First round of combat comes up. One of my friends is able to throw like Bane, I think. Bane, not Bane, but something like Bane on the Aboleth. So it has some sort of problem with its, or it has disadvantage on whatever it was. They weren't going to do very well on their wisdom saving throws. I'm like, great, now's the right time to use it. Cool, I cast Banishment on this guy. It's a solo fight. There's nothing else going on in this fight. Did it. The guy fails the banishment. The Aboleth fails the banishment. Aboleths are aberrations. He pops out of existence and goes back to the elemental plane of water, which is where I think they're from. And they're like, cool. So as long as I don't break concentration for a minute, that guy's not going to come back. There were, at this point, there were a few other like adds to the fight, and I was like, my sorcerer just tears off down the hall and leaves my friends to fight the mooks, and just runs around the corner and hides from everything. And that DM's like, what do I say? You had the right spell for the right situation. It was a smart play. And I was like, yeah, I took it before we even knew we were going to fight an Aboleth down here. I just happened to have it. I've been holding on to it. We hadn't fought anything it had been useful to. It's just been sitting in my log for a while. And finally an opportunity came up to use it, so I used it. And that's a good one. And it feels really good to just be like, oh, I have the right thing for the right situation. And adding combatants to that takes that away. Changing the terrain, change the monster, adjusting difficulties. It's very funny that adjusting difficulty is just kind of this one little section down here. Yeah, and like, so there's a lot of stuff for like making combat more interesting. And that's by like adjusting terrain, adjusting monsters, and adjusting difficulty. I would say all fall under that. But then we have a totally other section where we talk about fight or flight, which is weird because we already kind of talked about it up here. I'm not quite sure why we have so much dedicated to that. We have the reinstallation of the bloodied condition, the 4E thing, which is incredibly useful. A lot of things in 4E were triggered off of whether the creature was bloodied or not, or if you became bloodied, you would be able to do cool things. Often it's like an immediate, like, interrupting reaction kind of thing. Very cool. And pretty much, like, they're either going to run away or they're going to try to parlay. Honestly, I give them surrender. If they can't run, they will probably surrender. If they don't have any leverage to parlay, they're not going to really try to parlay. They have to just surrender. I like surrender because it gives, if that happens, the group, and now the group has prisoners, they have to figure out something to do with the prisoners on their adventure, which means there's probably ample opportunities for them to get away. And if they run away, they might fully run away, or they might show back up, they might talk to other people, they might show back up later in the adventure. But I rarely try to be like, what I try not to do is put the players in a situation where it's like, if they decide to show mercy and take this creature as a prisoner, and the prisoner gets out of their binds, what I don't want them to do is to immediately turn around and, like, while the PCs are sleeping or something, like try to stab them and try to kill a PC while they're like KO'd or something like that. That's not what this is for, because if you do that, they just will never take prisoners. And I don't want them to not take prisoners. I want to have a game where the player characters and monsters sometimes show mercy. Or sometimes, you know, if you get attacked by bandits on the road, they really only want your stuff. They're not really trying to kill you. So they're only attacking you because you're resisting them stealing your stuff. So they generally just want to knock you out and take your stuff. They're not really trying to kill you just to kill you. Non-combat challenges. Ooh, non-combat challenges. But this is all about XP rewards. But it's nice to have that. Milestone rewards. Again, doesn't really kind of give us an idea about like how to actually tie XP to it. They're like, use the rules for building encounters as a starting point. Okay. Interesting. Lots of level advancement. I haven't used XP based advancement. I'm trying to remember the last time I played in a game that used that. I played in a D&D game. I played other games that were used that. I think maybe the last time that I played in a game, in a D&D game where we used it was like, might have been right after the starter set came out. It might have been Mine of Fandelver. I think that was it. And that fighter died. And that's when I was like, rolling for hit points when I level up is garbage. Because I rolled like a 1 and a 2 on 2 level ups as a fighter. And then that's not good. You can't be a 3rd level fighter with like 15 hit points. It's not going to work out very well. Story-based advancement. DM's Toolbox. Oh, so we do get some chase rules. Which are a little bit different, but not a ton different. But we do get chase rules. And I think the exact same complications table. Creating a background, not important to us. Creating a creature, also not important to us. Creating a magic item. We may have reached the end of what we're looking for here. Curses and magical contagion. So that was something that wasn't in that previously. So curses, cursed creatures, and magic items, environmental curses. Because it's magic items and environmental, I would probably put this under our exploration aspect. Even though you could probably get them through combat. Or obviously you can obviously get curses through social encounters very easily. I wonder if maybe I should put the... No, it's fine. Curses and... Let's see. Magical contagions. Very interesting to have contagious, which is basically just magic diseases. So that's what we're just calling disease. No, it's just magical contagions. 5.5 rewrites are It's just so weird. Why couldn't we call this disease anymore? All right, so I'm going to remove that because we already had a section about the person, about diseases, and it's exactly the same, down to the examples they give us. Death. Lots of stuff about death, which is very interesting. And then we go into a section about doors. Okay. This very much feels like the objects section. And then into dungeons. Environmental effects. So I would add that. I don't think we had environmental effects under there. It helps if I look at the right thing. So I think you'll see probably with this is they started adding a lot more exhaustion mechanics because the exhaustion mechanics are much easier to deal with in 5.5 than they are in 5e because they changed it from being the specific track that you have where at the first level you immediately have disadvantage on all ability checks. It's now you just have a -1 to all d20 tests, which are attack, saves, and checks, which is significantly better. Because a disadvantage is mathematically similar, it's not by any means the same, as having a -5 to all your checks. And here finally we get the precipitation aspect. Oh, even though they've changed heavy precipitation to lightly obscured. Interesting. That is a change. It definitely used to be heavily obscured. So then that would mean that light precipitation just does nothing. Even though somehow it still changes the visibility range. I think that it would. Doesn't matter. It is interesting. You get a lot of stuff down in here. Fear and mental stress. This is what they basically replaced madness with. The frightened condition is very specific. Yeah, short-term and long-term and indefinite effects. So that's just been reworded, but it is roughly the same thing. Short-term effects. The character has the frightened, incapacitated, or stunned condition for 1d10 minutes. That's bad. Hopefully you don't get that in combat. Condition might be accompanied by alarming behavior or hallucinations. These effects can be suppressed with the calm emotion spell or removed by the lesser restoration spell. Oh, I like that because lesser restoration in 5e really not useful most of the time. You get firearms and explosives. Even though I think that's in WD. Alright. I feel like we have 7. Let's see if we get. Go back to the table of contents. Dungeons, firearms, explosives, gods, hazards. Okay, so we do have a section on hazards. That's nice. Was not a thing that we had previously. So we do get a section on hazards. Marks of prestige, poison, renowned settlements, siege equipment, supernatural gifts, which is new, but not important for. Now we have the step-by-step adventures. Now, what I really want to point at is down here into plan encounters, character objectives, keep the adventure moving, something for everyone, multiple ways to progress, social interaction encounters, exploration encounters, combat encounters. Now, you're like, great. Looking at the table of contents, you go, great. Finally, we're going to get some stuff that's going to tell us how to put all these things together. You may notice that all of these things start on the same page. That means that you're getting maybe a third of the page to detail an entire format. So we're not going to get anything here. We're going to get really a time frame, a frame of work of how to kind of put them together. I think they're probably just going to give us the old, try out the old complex checks and checks. But hey, and I appreciate the hustle. And let's look at the one too far. Creating adventure step by step. Lay out the premise, draw on the players, plan encounters, bring it to an end. So these are the bands. If you've heard me talk about the adventure tiers many times, here you have them spelled out. Local heroes, fate of a village, 5 through 10. Heroes of the realm, determine the fate of a region. 11 through 16, masters of the realm. And then 17 through 20, masters of the world. Which works very closely to kind of how I do my 4 levels of scale for hex mapping. You have that local league hex area. You're fighting very specific local threats. Move up to things that are kind of dealing with entire regions. Then, which is the county kind of level. Then you move up to region level, where now you're talking about entire nations' fates at that point. Which makes sense. It says right here, fate of a nation. Or even the world. Yeah, things that could be international threats at that. And then by the time you're getting to level 17 and you're going higher beyond that, you're looking at things where you're talking about, we're dealing with things that affect kind of the entire world or are potentially interdimensional threats from different planes, those kind of things. Very simple. When you're preparing an adventure to run for your friends, you don't need to write hundreds of pages describing each location in exhaustive detail. Most of the adventures I run are kind of like 2 pages. And they provide many sessions of play. Very simple. I like having the examples. That's nice. Of situations. That's fun. Adventure inhabitant. Then it feels like we kind of get a little bit lost in the sauce. We're drawing in the players. That's fine. Yeah, this looks similar to the place that we're actually dealing with in the campaign I'm playing in. Except if it was underwater. Books. Plan your encounters. All right, now we're down to encounters. All the objectives are pretty much the same. The adventure moving, that's all same. Something for everyone. Know your player section in chapter 2. Yep. Multiple ways to progress. Make sure there are multiple ways for the characters to progress through the adventure at any point. So if they miss one way, they have an alternative. Exactly what I talked about. You want to make sure that there aren't bottlenecks. So if you have to get through this one door that is locked, they have to be able to get through the door, or you have to give them some other way to get through. So if it's a locked door and they suck at picking it, or they don't have anybody who can pick it in that group, they have to be able to find the keys somewhere in the front half of the adventure to get through that door. That means there's got to be some combat encounter they come across with the guy's going to have the key on them that they can lift it off their dead body, or they can find it in a room by searching like a desk or something. They can find it there, or in maybe there's like a hat rack or a coat rack or a closet or something, and it's like in a jacket pocket. They can find something of that nature. They have to have a way to be able to get. You need to give them either multiple ways to get to the same place or multiple ways to get through the same obstacle. They could also just break the door down too, depending on what the door is made out of. Combat encounters. all that stuff together. The hazard section. Right. So that's right. I forgot that hazards are like hazards. So there's no obstacles when we talk about what I call HOTS, when I look at exploration challenges. So HOT stands for hazard, obstacle, tricks, or traps. When they talk about hazards, they are only talking about that. So D&D in 5th edition totally really only focuses on the traps version and the hazards. Occasionally they'll pay some lip service to the obstacle. That was things like the blizzard or the cliffs. Those sorts of things are obstacles. Some sort of what you're looking for in non-combat encounters, something that you can't kill your way. So they have to choose some other way to get to the cliff. Can't kill a cliff. No matter how hard you try. Can't kill the cliff. So here's what they say. So, all right. So we have even less because we have this nice picture that's taking up a quarter of the. So social interaction encounters, you get 1 paragraph. Offers advice. Look in the chapter 2 for offers advice for handling social encounters. Can help you craft these encounters. The non-player character section in chapter 3 is also essential for creating this. So we will look at that section, but I can very readily assume, I feel like, that we're not going to get mechanics out of that section. It's going to be you need those ideals, bonds, and flaws. So we're running social interactions, but doesn't really tell us how to take a social interaction and make it into an encounter. It does not give us that same framework that we had in 5e, like the base DMG, like we have right here, where it's like, oh, they have a starting attitude. You're going to make some checks to potentially improve their attitude based off of what they say, and maybe some checks they want to, insights to uncover maybe what those bonds are, maybe that you do some secondary research before by talking to other people or doing research about them to put yourself in a position to win them over in this encounter, get gifts and stuff like that. Do 1 final charisma check at the end, which is pass fail, which is maybe not the greatest mechanic in the world, but it's fine. It's a 1 and done. If there is some sort of substantial input from another piece or advantage disadvantage on the final check, that has been replaced in 5.5 by saying that you can just do the help action as long as you talk about how you would be giving that help action. So I would say that anybody who is doing substantial input into the conversation in a productive way would give them the advantage. And instead of giving them an advantage, I might twist the DC a little bit. If they really said something dumb that really upset them, they might change, temporarily move their attitude down, or I might just change the DC slightly. So instead of needing to roll a DC 13, maybe now they need 15. But again, this is a framework. 5.5 did not give us that framework. In fact, they removed that out of it. So we will check the non-player character section, but I can't imagine that it's going to have this framework in it. That would be a weird place to put it if you didn't put it under the social section or the creating adventure section. Exploration encounters. Encounters focused on exploration might involve the characters trying to disarm a trap, find a secret door, or discover something about the adventure location. The problem, which is the problem that I've been kind of alluding to and or talked about throughout this, is that each one of those 3 things is like a check. That's 1 person making 1 check. Disarming a trap is a disarm track. That's a thieves' tool check. 1 person makes that check. Find a secret door. That's a search action. That's a check that 1 person can make. And they have to be making it in the right place. And trying to discover something about the adventure location is wildly vague, but I assume this is like a history check or a nature check or something of that nature. The nature of a nature check. But something along those lines. Each of those is a check that maybe multiple people could do, but more likely that somebody will give help action to somebody who will then make the check. But a single check an encounter does not make. which is what we get into. It's like you can't be, all right, this is going to be a really robust thing where you're like, we're going to support all 3 pillars of play. We're going to have 1 30-minute combat, and after we come out of that, there's going to be a trap, and that'll be a 6-second thing, or a 30-second thing where somebody's like, you come across you see a trap, cool, I rolled to disarm the trap, great, you succeeded. So those two are not equal. So what is your answer? That you put 1 billion traps in there so that only the rogue character can mess with this stuff when everybody gets to deal with the combat stuff? Like, how do you create a exploration encounter where each player character has agency in it and every player feels like they get to be a part of the solution figuring that? That's what we're missing. Those are the rules that we're missing. Where are those rules? Where's the framework to do that? So the running exploration section in chapter 2 can help you craft these encounters as well as run them. Well, it told us how to travel. So that's cool. And we have rules for chase, but that's actually in a different area. There it does. Chapter 3, chases, curses and magical contagions, doors, environmental effects, like a door's not an encounter. Hazards, poison, and traps. It's very frustrating. You're like, okay, so 2 of the 3 pillars get half, like a quarter of a page, and combat encounters get well, we started on 114 and we're at 119. So 4 to 5 pages of making them. Now that also includes random encounters. But a lot of stuff like monster behavior, like why is this down in this area? And not in the social aspect. So D&D is very clear, you can see just from that little microcosm example, as to where they put the attention of their roles. The least amount of attention, right there in social interaction. You get 1 little paragraph. Exploration, you get 2 paragraphs. That's twice as many rules. And then combat, you have a buttload of stuff that goes into combat. And this isn't wrong, but when most of the DMing advices tells you about like how important it is to add all these other aspects of your game that's not combat, but then doesn't provide a lot of support to do that, left with a lot of dungeon masters who feel lost, especially newer dungeon masters who haven't played in a whole bunch of other systems, who haven't played in a bunch of games, who haven't had a lot of that hard-won experience just by grinding it out as a dungeon master or game master and throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what's gonna stick. It's very different. And this is a company that has a problem, which is that a lot of people don't want a dungeon master because they don't feel like they can do it. And when this is the tool set that you're given to do that, it's kind of only 1/3 of the game in a lot of aspects. Yeah, it's tough, man. Yeah, not gonna lie to you. I would feel really discouraged. I feel like I would have a really hard time getting into D&D today, and especially becoming a dungeon master. Tell you about sort of my journey. Now, I played D&D before, but when I got back into it when I was an adult, it was basically when I was coming out of college. I got back into it, and that's when the kind of 4th edition was coming out. It was new vogue. I was like, new edition of D&D, perfect time to like get back into it. I'd been watching like Geek and Sundry stuff, which is right before Critical Role happened. I was watching him before Critical Role happened, and so they had talked about, oh, there's like a new edition of Dungeons and Dragons coming out. I was like, oh well, you know, I'm looking for, now that I'm out of college and I'm looking for like friend group stuff, like some social stuff to fill up my time. I jumped in, I played with some people, I learned the rules pretty easily. I think I spent like like the day before I played to be like, okay, let me see if I can figure out how to make a character and how to do those things. They were doing the RPGA, which is the 4th edition version of like Encounters program, where you show up at a store where somebody's like, this store is going to have somebody who's going to run D&D. If you show up, you will be able to play. You're in the Adventurers League. It's the 4th edition Adventurers League is what it is. And you can show up. You'll be able to play with whoever shows up. So if you show up, you're going to get a game. I showed up. I had a character. I played. I was like, oh, that was a lot of fun. Came back, played again. These are all like pre-written modules too. And so after... I don't know how long I played before I ran. It wasn't that long. I remember running my first game in 4th edition. But it was still a while. I probably played... You know, I'd probably say that I played maybe... When I ran it in the summer. I played maybe like 2 months of 4th edition before I felt like I could run it. We were all the group that we ran with that was doing it, that version of Adventurers League, was always looking for people to run more games. So we would often have, the group would have like 3 games running in the same room at the same time. Eventually, you know, there was spots, and I was like, I can try. I've never done it before, but I'm willing to try it. They're like, yeah, it's pretty easy. You're gonna have printed out material. You follow it. And I sat down and I ran the adventure, and I will tell you that it was a shit show. Is what it was. It did not go well. Characters, I had players that were doing friendly fire on each other with fireball, not fireball, but fire spells. They were whomping combats against me, and I walked away from that being like, man, that did not go well. But I was also running a published thing, and I was like, after I got done and I sat down that evening and I read the adventure back over again, and I went, this didn't go well, but I don't think that was necessarily my fault. I was like, I just don't think that this is a very well written adventure. And so I was like, so I'll play again, but I'm gonna look online to see if there are maybe some, because there were a buttload of modules you could choose from. So I just kind of chose one out of that. I was like, so I'm gonna go online and see, you know, what people think are the best ones. So I found one that was a little bit better, and I read that, and I went, okay, yeah, no, I understand this one a little bit better, I think. And I ran that, and that went a lot better. And so I did it more. And then I felt like I gelled with a number of people that I was playing with in sort of this larger group, who also had like other home games. So then I kind of started playing with somebody else in a home game, and went from there. And then eventually I was like, oh, I'm gonna run, but now we're playing a home game, so now I got to make up my own stuff. So I ran like some other published adventures, like short adventures, not like long adventures like 5e has. And I ran that, and then started making my own adventures. But the nice thing is I had that framework. And actually, you know what? I have this. They put out a very helpful thing. Let me put you guys over there so I can pull it up, because I got to find it in my files. Let me go with... if I can find this thing. No, not that. Because they came out with this thing called My Realm. And I think I still have some of them. I do have some of them. Nice. So I want to show you one of those. This is My Realms from 2009. My Realms adventure is a DM's chance to shape the fate of the group of characters. So what this is that this was for that Encounters group for doing that. It was a way that you could make a custom adventure for the Adventurers League style thing. So you could make up your own. So you could run an entire campaign through it if you wanted to that way. in the Living Forgotten Realms event. So what do I run? And it gave you this idea of like, oh, here are the adventure guidelines to how to make an adventure that fits within this rubric. Remember that each one of these is basically a one-shot. Is how these are set up. You start at the beginning, you start it in the session, you're supposed to finish it in the session, so it takes about 3 to 4 hours to play. Stocking your adventures, like how to use it with your adventure tiers, your encounter budget, 2 different things. Gave you this idea. Oh, here's some lists of plots and rumors that you can pull stuff from as plot hooks and add stuff in for different areas in the world if you want to set it in different places. New rules that came with some of those things, adventure questions, story awards. Now, where is the rubric? I guess this is just pretty much the rubric. I thought there was another one that had a very more specific way. No, this is only for 4 through 7. That's fine. I think this is just for the bottom tier, right? Yeah, 1 through 4. For low heroic tier. So they give you an encounter budget that makes up the entire adventure, and you can spend that however you want. But it does give you some ideas about where to kind of put that encounter budget XP. To put monsters into encounters, build skill challenges, which is the way 4th edition was like, this is how you handle types of encounters outside of combat. So it's a way that you could do both exploration encounters as a rubric for that or social encounters, either one. So you give some options for different skills you can use during that, and it's very much, like I said, you trying to succeed 5 times before you fail 3 times. And everybody has a chance, everybody gets an opportunity to do it, and usually you can't duplicate a check that you've already done. To make sure there's a little bit of variety so you don't just spam the same thing over and over again. But I had run enough of them at this point that I understood kind of how to use it. Which was, you're pretty much going to make about 3 scenes most of the time. 3 encounter scenes. And you're going to have a place at your start where they're going to get the adventure and then learn a little bit of stuff. Then they're going to go into that first scene, which sometimes a combat encounter. You usually don't do 3 combat encounters. They usually do like 2 of one type or 1 of another, or sometimes 1 of each type. So it works out a little bit. You'll move through things pretty quickly if you don't do 2 combat. So it's usually 2 combats. Usually it's 1 easier combat, 1 harder combat, and then something that's or a particularly heavy combat game. Even heavier on the combat than I'd say 5th edition. But having this stuff gave me a really great idea about how to create a successful adventure in a very sort of templated, formulaic kind of way. And so, yeah, once I got into a home game and I was able to expand on that and change things up and run bigger encounters, run smaller encounters, run different kinds of encounters, that stuff. But having those things, and I still keep a bunch of those adventures. I still got a few of them. Like, let's. That's Menace of the Icy Spot. Here's crystal clear. Oh, can't open that without extraction. Things all zipped up. Panther, Elder Wisdom. Here's Elder Wisdom. This is 1. So you get a little adventure background, player's introduction, DM's introduction. Here's the first encounter, Kobold's Kill. Tells you stuff that's going on, how to scale the encounter if you need to scale the encounter. Stat blocks for it. The map of what everything's doing there. Meet the dwarf. So you get a little bit more of a talking social encounter. We're trying to find out things about what's going on with them and how they can help. You learn a bit about the history of the ruins. You run into Encounter 3, which is the entrance. So this one's actually got quite a few more in it. Approach the entrance. There's the living quarters. It's got stuff in it. Most of these are just rooms that you're moving through. The big skeeters. You're going to have a sturge encounter here. And when drakes attack, this is a drake attack one. This encounter, I remember, is quite deadly. It's going to be a quite deadly encounter. Is the way that's set up, because one of these drakes kind of hides and then drops in about like in round 2. So usually hits somebody in the back that's not prepared to be hit with a frontline attacker. So it's going to hit like a wizard in the back. Tough. Counter 7. So it gives you an option to do a skill challenge if you want to, or combat if you do it that way. And that's it. You return. Counter 8, return to Ruin Smoke. Starting and getting your stuff. So they kind of give you a very easy way, like, hey, here's a very easy way to build on an encounter. It's very straightforward. It's all, as you can see, it's all very, very basic. The formatting, it's not very pretty to look at, but it tells you everything that you do and how to set up the maps and stuff like that. So it's very bare bones, but it does give you what you need to run. Now, this is also like 30 pages, but most of that stuff is like the beginning stuff that you don't need. You don't really need anything to. But it is different. And so I would say look at stuff like that. Those are, I found to be much more useful when I was trying to figure out the DMing. And I shouldn't say that I didn't dungeon master before that. Like I dungeon mastered when I was a kid. But it was also I was quite young, and so I didn't really understand the rules. This would be pre 3rd edition. And so, like I said, the old school rules are hard to learn just by reading them. So I didn't really understand a lot of what I was doing, but I had a ton of fun making random dungeons, and I would play, which is essentially make believe with the pretend rule set of where we did a whole bunch of stuff wrong all the time. Oftentimes we didn't have dice, so we were using like a deck of cards. We were just kind of making up the rules as we went along, and making up the adventures as we went along. But lots of fun. Really got me into the hobby, and then I became a teenager and got into my 20s, and I was busy thinking about other things than fantasy TTRPGs, but ended up coming back to it, and it is now the hobby that I love. But I think that's enough for us to talk about today. I am certainly way over my time. We're running in on 4 hours, so certainly longer than I was planning to do this, but it gives us a look at that stuff. I think we'll drop in, and I want to look at some of the 4th edition stuff, because some of the 4th edition, and particularly the DMGs, are really, really, they're very good. As that idea that trying to figure out how to run the game just out of a book. I think significantly better than either the 5e DMG. So that is probably what we'll look at. I don't know when we're going to do that. Probably not next time. This Saturday, I'm probably going to run solo RPG. I need to sit down and I think I'm going to fill out a little bit of the map. But other than that, we should be good to go there. But that's it for this time. So if you have any questions about that or the D&D rules, or were you surprised about like how little social interaction, how many like how little framework there is for stuff in D&D outside of just combat? There's tons of combat rules and how to run combat and how to set it up and build the encounters, and then so little as to how to do the other aspects of the game that they say are equally important. Yet you would not know that by looking at the rules. And tell me if you like some of that stuff. Like I talked about how I don't really like the chase rules and use my own chase rules. What are things that you've done? If you have homebrew rubrics or formats or templates or that you've come up with for how to do non-combat encounters, whether those are social interactions or getting through the encounter and like environmental encounters, go ahead and share them with us. I want to learn about them. I'm always looking for more stuff like that. So I'm going to appreciate it for sure. But that's going to be it for me. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. This is always fun. And I will talk to you real soon. And in fact, it's going to be Saturday. Unless something happens. Knock on wood. I'm going to knock on wood right now. There we go. So I'll see you real soon. All right, guys. Bye.